Oh, so you have a position you wrote, I thought it was NCs, right?
Right.
Anyways, where you said the committees were formed because there was no town manager. The committees were formed actually, so the sunshine laws. So they go back to like the eighties. And
Oh, okay.
whenever that kicked in. And
Don't worry, I'm not beating myself up too much.
Learning experience.
That system.
I saw that, I saw you.
Yeah.
It was nice that it crisscrossed.
Yeah. Picture where the dice were. I'm interested to see the next PowerPoint, that'll really.
This is very important. Get your name right. Thanks for the money. I can't tell you how many times people put two keys in it. You probably endured that one.
Yeah.
Oh, it's on the river's fault.
Yeah.
Famous now.
So.
Okay.
Oh, it's baby.
Yeah.
I'm so tired of this. So it's okay. Not the problem.
I think they've reached the height of what it means to be a public figure, having their family dispute world news.
Oh, yeah.
Ooh,
Oh,
yikes.
Being invisible in the modern world is a full-time job. Once a month, I flash all the stuff that's tracking me.
I gotta do that. The New York Times had an article about the stuff that you can install. and keep tracking. Gotta do that.
There's what browser did you use?
Oh,
Well, then track. Okay.
it's amazing. I'll order something online and immediately ads start showing up for the same thing.
It's either two of them.
It was having a conversation.
No, I use Firefox.
I've never read it.
That's so. In fact, he does. You use Firefox.
I used to, no, I use Chrome. I don't care. They got you. You can't get it. Even if it's anonymous, they still know you. Siri. They have a number.
Siri.
They do. Their ID address. In this day and age, it's pretty fixed.
Did you ask me to go away?
let me check that.
Yeah, Firefox would add black plus to get rid of a lot of the tracking. Did you hear about the metapixels that were on the H&R Block?
Or not, I don't know.
Okay, you know how when you go to IRS to do your taxes online? There's about 3 out there. H&R Block is one. All 3 of them, Facebook has metapixels. They're sucking in all your financial data off the sites.
Yeah.
You're owned, man.
Yeah. I get it. We used to use a certain called. Yeah, so I got it's independent in there, yeah, quick list. And this is tracking all our spending. Credit. So I put it in the end of the month and see which one is. Whatever category. That's good. Check it and look up from anonymous, but if like. Only reason that they're doing that is it's not as a service to me.
Right, that's the billing profile.
Yeah, it's what they're doing with making loans. They're taking people that might need loans and offering them loans.
Have you,
That's how they fund it.
Have we heard from other board members?
Well, John's here. So
Oh, John's here, okay.
That's the only one. He's saying that I counted now. Fine. And you have 48.
I'm fine. What? It all had this started half an hour ago.
Oh.
So Rick is not here.
Oh, I have no idea. No, it's, you can choose.
Oh, yeah, and Dave Canute is going to be here tonight.
Yeah, so just came in.
Oh. Jeremiah.
Oh, Jeremiah, that's fine. All right, well, whoever shows up. It's now. Well, we start.
Yes.
So I call this meeting, US work session, whatever it is to order. Let's do a roll call. Over the clerk. We don't need a quorum.
Yeah,
You're not doing anything.
sitting here, it's being recorded though.
It's being streamed on YouTube.
Okay.
Yes.
Say it here.
Yeah, so. Mayor Margaret, here, trustee Marshall,
Yep.
trustee Smith.
Hey.
She's talking. He's talking. He's here too. Trustee Valentine.
When you get to me, I'm here, just take Valentine.
Okay, and trustee Jason. It's not here.
Down to. This is an important one too.
Now, we're on video, so we also have our attorney and chief of police and finance. Our finance.
Right, right. Hello,
Oh,
this is me. Are you there? Can you hear me? Yeah. Oh, yes. Can you hear me? There he is. Hey, oh.
With him. I should pay $5. Okay.
Trustee, can you send this one? This bird.
Sorry, that's the call. I was out front. That's why I didn't answer. I was driving.
It's on the stage.
Hope you guys want to start?
Yeah, let's go for it. Yeah. Well, thanks for everyone making me feel so well. I appreciate being here with you. It's a lot easier. And so we're gonna start off tonight with this roles, responsibilities, and avoiding liability training. And with that, I will get right into it. Next slide, please. So first, we're going to talk about potential for incurring liability, and that's it's intimately tied with your job description. So we're going to talk about that a lot tonight as well. And then talking about distinguishing the role of the board and the town administrator, which will help make the board's role clearer. Reducing roles in administrative matters as the board. And we're going to talk about, see if you guys have any questions about those topics. And then we'll have a discussion scenario. And the organizational structure workshop is really to kind of discuss what was in the handbooks, the workbooks that Leslie prepared. And that we'll get even further into some of the details and the weeds of that. So next slide, please. This is just the title, so we'll go to the next slide. So as a board member, you do have protection from liability under the Colorado Government Immunity Act,
but that's only if you're acting within the scope of your employment and not acting willfully constantly. So I'm not going to talk much about willful and wanton conduct tonight. That's typically if you're acting with pretty much gross indifference and somebody gets injured or, you know, do something that you know is wrong in those instances. So we're going to focus more on the scope of employment tonight, and that involves knowing your job description. Next slide, please. So insurance is another big thing. And as you know, CIRSA is the town's insurer. And when CIRSA is evaluating a claim against the town or against individual board members, against a staff member, they will look to see if the allegations are outside of the scope of employment. And CIRSA can't defend or indemnify the suit if your acts are outside the scope of your employment. They won't do it. Next slide, please. So the town won't have an obligation under the CPA to defend a board member that acts outside of the scope of the board member's employment. And what typically will happen there is the town's interests might become at odds with your own. Say you're acting alone. Why would the rest of the board support you in that instance when you're doing something that goes against what you're supposed to be doing? There's lots of pressures that come up, and we'll see that in the discussion scenario, which is a little bit extreme, but it will help kind of call. But your odds, your interests become at odds with the town's when you act out of the scope of employment, because the town has some obligations to identify you. So that means you might be responsible for defending yourself and paying any settlement or judgment against you. Next slide, please. So now we're going to get into the job description. Next slide. Thank you. So these are all from the code, and we'll see that there are some conflicting statements in the code that eventually I'm going to recommend that the correct it actually is as soon as possible. And I think that's one of our hopes, that this will result in some positive changes to the town's organizational structure. And the best place to start with that is the code, then go top down. So you'll see in the first bullet there that the board constitutes the legislative body of the town, and exercises powers conferred on this and has the power to adopt such laws, ordinances, and resolutions. And the administrative, and this is where it gets a little bit confusing. This is another section of the code that says that the executive administrative powers of the town, except those delegated to the town administrator, are vested or trustees. So typically, we'll see in another slide that there's a similar section that delegates those exact same powers to the town administrator. So see how there's a conflict. So typically what the board does is it acts by voting, and that's really the board's job, is to act by voting. And so before acting, you want to look for a law, an ordinance, a resolution, or a motion that authorizes you to do that. And if you see, what if you see conflicting authorities? And we just talked about one of them. What do we do in that scenario? And I think it's a hard question to answer. I think the answer is probably ask the attorney in most instances. But really, you need to figure out a way to resolve the conflict before action. Otherwise, if some things go awry and you get sued, you have to be able to face authority and say, this one, but there's a conflicting one, and you haven't resolved that, and then you can still get in trouble even if you So I think this is a good point at the end here. If you can't find authority through your action, probably outside the scope of your employment. Next slide, please. So legislative responsibilities vest in the board as a body, and with few exceptions for responsibilities spelled out from the mayor, the statutes and town ordinance provide that the powers and duties of the board are exercised by the body and not any individual. So that's why you hear attorneys and others say the board acts as one. You have one vote, but the board acts as a whole. So it's just trying to hammer the point home. You should find clear authority to take action other than the vote. Next slide, please. So now we're going to talk about delegations and how those impact your role. So a delegation is an official action by the board to allocate the power or duty or set powers and duties to an officer of the town. Authority can also be delegated to the mayor or a single board member, but it shouldn't conflict with those powers and duties already generally delegated to an officer of the town. Most often it's the town administrator. Once you delegate a power or duty to an officer, that authority becomes hers. So you can't take that back unless you use another official action to do so. And that's I said equal dignity. All of that means, and the board knows this. I've heard it in a lot of your meetings. The mayor will say, but if you act with an ordinance, you need to act with another ordinance to roll that back. If you act by resolution, you have to change what you did by ordinance or resolution, something of equal or higher dignity. In essence. So you can't, for example, amend the code by simple motion. It has to be.
Yeah.
So absolutely.
So can you give an example of delegating to a single board member or the mayor or something that is already delegated?
Yeah. So a good example of some delegations of authority. Committees, for example. This board has established some committees, and we're going to talk about the costs and benefits of having done that. But sometimes the board will delegate to a committee a certain task, and that would be, for example, looking over an ordinance and making recommendations to the rest of it. That's still within your legislative function in that instance, where you're looking to specific board members to really get down in the weeds and say, we're recommending this ordinance to the remainder of the board because of this and that factor. And so that's a good, and that legislative authority wouldn't necessarily trample on or bleed over into any of the executive or administrative powers. And we'll talk about those a little bit down the road, but essentially your legislative authority is your policy making function. It's broad, it affects folks in the abstract, whereas administrative authority really has to do with carrying out those broad policies.
I think the finance committee is a really good example of a very functional committee that's delegated the authority to go deep. What are these invoices for? Do they make sense? So the whole board doesn't have to do that, and then they report back.
Yeah, so if following a delegation, you attempt to act within that delegated authority, you're outside of your role. So that's why those statements in the code are really important. And you'll see that there are other delegations of authority too. Hopefully, next slide that will help further thresh this out. Next slide, please. This is another delegation of authority to the chief of police, and you'll see the first bullet there, seeing that the ordinances of the town and the laws of the state are duly enforced in a regulation police department. So that is a typical statement that you will see as delegation of authority to the chief of police. And then you'll see too, directing the operations, and where your authority comes in is in that the second clause of that sentence. subject to the rules and regulations thereof. The board has retained that authority. It says, while delegating the direction of the operations, police departments, you have some authority to establish the rules and regulations. But the remainder has been delegated to the police chief. And I won't read those out loud. I think that, but those are the other delegated authorities. Chief, next slide, please. So this is I just point out first that where it says, except as may otherwise be provided, the executive, administrative authority, powers, and duties of the town shall be exercised and performed by the town administrator. Where it gets very confusing is that it says, except as may otherwise be provided, and you'll see that in the other section that we read earlier, that it has similar language. It says, except as has been delegated to the town administrator. So it's very circular. And really, I don't think from these two code sections that we've said do conflict, I don't think you can find clear authority. So that's an issue that I think the board addressed, right? So this is just a very long paragraph. So in the next slide, I've broken it out a little bit to see if we can get anything out of it despite the conflict. So next slide, please, Sam. Okay, so we'll go to the next slide, please.
Yeah, before you get too far, do you think the same applies for the statement at the end of the chief of police? It says perform other duties as may be necessary. Do you think that that's likewise a conflict or like just broad?
I think it would definitely help to like further thresh that out. I think there are better distinctions elsewhere in the code with the town administrators and the chief of police's duties. That's a little clear. I think we can interpret that basically being as directed by the board. But I think that's very, very much a lot of these sections. Yeah, I don't think it would be that big. So, so we've kind of already read the first clause of that sentence, and this is really spelling out further the conflict. And you see in this second bullet point is actually talking about the board's powers. And then it says, except those which have been delegated to the town administrator pursuant to the section. So that really just refers to section 2920. I think it should have said article. And then if you go further down in the article, you get to the town administrator authority. So that simple fix by changing that to article would probably do the job. But I think it's worth taking a hard look at all of the provisions, particularly in Title II, Chapter 2 of the code, because that's really where your organizational structure lies, at least at a broad level. So we'll go to the next slide, please.
Nick, I was just wondering, because I read through that too, and I wondered, does it also need to make it clearer that the trustees still have the overarching authority?
I think it does. I think that makes a lot of sense. I think really it's typically the way it's structured is a board is vested with all the powers of the municipality, whether that be legislative, whether that be administrative, quasi-judicial is another one. In essence, acting as a judge, and you delegate some of that authority to the board of adjustment, for example, in variance hearings, those types of matters. But yes, I think starting with all the powers vested and what power are we then going to delegate to the town administrator, to other department heads? I think thinking of it in that way is the best way to do it, sort of as that the umbrella that is the board. So we're going to set aside that conflict in the code before, because I do think that that's a relatively easy conflict to address from at least a drafting standpoint. I think it's going to be a decision of the board to decide what authorities it does want to delegate. But right here, I'm trying to make sense of this statement, except as otherwise provided. So there are some exceptions. So the mayor does retain some executive authority because you do have a mayor council structure with an appointed town administrator. And I have seen it before. It's rare, but I think the way that we can talk about that is the executive authority that's vested in the mayor is different from that of the town administrator. What we're really talking about when it comes to the mayor is the veto power and the tie vote, and then being the executive for ceremonial purposes. And those are all clear authorities in the code. And then the police chief is also been delegated some administrative. And this is about exhaustive list of what we had talked about before. So we're trying to figure out what the town administrator's authority is in this instance. We see that the mayor has some of that, the police chief has some of that, and that helps us determine what the town administrator's powers and duties are. Next slide, please. So this is the remainder, and I tried to put this in plainer terms than that long paragraph. Oh, that's going to be in the next slide, but I broke out that big long paragraph. And if you go to the next slide, it will show the plainer terms. So the town administrator oversees public works, parks, and utilities in the subject departments, oversees town's finances in the finance department. And these are all in accordance with the town code and the board adopted budget. In the instance of finances, of course, really everything in accordance with the board adopted budget. And that's one authority that all boards retain. And that's one of the ways that you oversee the work of the staff. Ensuring the public health and welfare of the town, and that's to the extent not reserved for the board's policy-making function or when it's delegated to the police chief. So you can see that town administrators are typically charged with carrying out the town's policies, the ordinances, when it's not in the province of the police chief, and that usually has to do with municipal prosecution. So carrying out nuisances, the abatement of nuisances in accordance with the town code, hopefully not carrying out nuisances. Yes, and then you can see that this is pretty much directly out of shore that purchases and leases of town equipment and supplies. Of course, that's subject to the budget and purchasing policies adopted and established by the board. So you see another item of authority that the board retains, but then again, hands over a certain part of the decision making to the town administrator. And then the exercise of all other powers of the town, not in the exercise of legislative authority or judicial authority. So that's very broad, but in essence, what you're saying is you have an administrator, and you want that administrator to carry out the administration of the town. When you adopted this ordinance and enacting this code amendment, you were in essence saying, we don't want to be full-time, staff members essentially in town. We want our hired staff to do this work for us. We want to hire professionals to do it. And that's why you retain the authority to make these broad policies, enact ordinances, but you delegate the administration of those ordinances and policies to the administrator. So next slide, please. So this is about reducing your involvement in administrative matters. And so you delegated administrative matters, almost all of it, if we take us, if we don't pay attention to that conflict for a second, and delegated those administrative matters to your town staff. And really, your role is to establish the town's corporate values and missions, set overall goals and priorities, and to give broad direction. And for efficiency's sake, we always recommend that you leave the details to your higher professionals. You know, think about in your jobs, did it feel good to be micromanaged by your boss? Did you operate better when you were figuring out the problems, the solutions to the problems on your own? I certainly operate better when my boss is that. So this is so really from a practical standpoint, when you're inappropriately involved in administrative matters, it can undermine your chosen form of government. And it can waste resources that you've already committed to your chosen form of government. And from a legal standpoint, it can increase your risk of liability. So we'll go on to the next slide, please. So this is where it gets really important because the risk of liability is highest when it comes to personnel involvement. So that's why we harp on as attorneys the legislative administrative distinction. The board is an appropriate role in personnel. You have control. You have it delegated. Some of the town administrator has authority to, or town manager will have the authority to say, okay, these are what I think the personnel policy should be, and enact those by him or herself. I've never necessarily recommended that, but that does happen. And so typically in municipalities, the board will adopt the personnel policies, and there might be something in code that says on the advice of the town administrator, things like that, because of course you're going to want to at least have the input from your highest executive, if you think that makes sense. So you also have the ability to select your direct reports. And what I'm seeing in the code right now is you have the ability to select the town manager. And I do believe that I know that there's been some confusion about this, but I believe also the chief of police is direct report. Just based on what it says in the code, and we can certainly delve into details on that. So then, you know, the board has the ability to select its officers, and those I'm talking about statutory officers in that sense. So, you know, your town clerk, your town administrator, your town treasurer. So that's really, you have that ability. Officer selection and treasurer selection of the town clerk, you can structure that differently. So it doesn't mean they have to be direct reports to you just because they're a statutory officer. They can be organized under the town administrator, just like other departments. So there's some discretion in that. And then of course, budget. That is you determine essentially through adoption of the budget how many employees the town's going to have, what positions they have, which ones are going to cut. Next slide, please. So I think it is good to think about it as a chain of command, and it's you know, it's part of your oath to uphold the town's ordinances and personnel policies as well. So you don't want to reach below the level of your direct reports and personnel matters, and you don't want to be pressured to bypass the chain of command. And I say even in a public meeting, you know, if there's an instance where you've observed something happening around town and you want to address that in a public meeting, that's great. But I think it has to be dealt with in a way that doesn't call out specific employees unless they're your direct reports. Because if it does, you are effectively bypassing that chain of command. You're interfering with efficiency, and you know, you're also opening yourself to liability there's direction that results in a sort of liability for the town. So if you're looking at issues involving a single employee, rather not just your direct reports, and rather than the group as a whole, that's likely an administrative issue that should be entrusted to your town administrator. Can't get into the weeds, and this is further harping on those principles. But really, yeah, you can't get into disciplinary matters. When there's I've worked for a lot of municipalities. They do get sued by employees that separate their employment from the town quite often. And the board can't have involvement in those issues unless for some reason the board has retained all administrative authority. And in Paonia's case already, in its ordinances, it has delegated that authority to the town administrator and in its personnel policies. So you can't really get involved with disciplinary matters unless that's a direct report of yours. That doesn't mean you're not going to receive updates in executive session about, what's going on. But it's going to be high level because really, it's not in the town's interest from a liability standpoint that you get involved in this person disciplinary. And you don't want to get into the details of the individual's duties or job performance, and you should be able to trust your town manager, your town administrator to do that. So, I think hopefully it's clear that that's really why you want to be able to trust your town administrator to do that, and that's why it's important in your selection of town administrator too. So, next slide, please. So I've gone through a lot. If anyone has any questions, maybe that would be a good time. So I can move on to
Yeah, just in general, like, as you go through this, how does the language that you're seeing here compare to other towns? I mean, obviously, I don't think you'd be making examples of it if you didn't think it narrative wasn't common. But how much work do we have to do? That's the question.
Yeah, I think there's certainly some work to be done. And I think first starting in chapter 2 of the code, just to kind of better show clearly your organizational structure, because it is unclear. So I think those two sections where there's some overlap between administrative and executive authority that the board retains and that has been delegated to the town administrator, that to me is a clear conflict. And then I think the next step after you get that worked out would be in the personnel policies. And, then you can work out, I've delegated this authority to the town administrator. And now in working on the personnel guidelines, we're working down another step. And that's the only time that you work down below the town administrator in most instances, unless you have other direct reports. So you're working on the personnel guidelines and essentially with the town administrator to determine what's best from a structural standpoint, kind of from the top down after working on this. And I will say that, the structure, I think, I'm kind of reading between the lines, but I think it's pretty much there. It's just not spelled out well. And I think that's what's, I think it's pretty clear that it is clear that you have a council mayor. But to answer the first part of your question, Alice, is that what's not spelled out is what that means from there. And that's what's different from other towns and cities. You have that spelled out in a number of places, even in the personnel policies, the form of government you have, but the form of government you've chosen, and it's inconsistent with what actually happens in practice sometimes. Yeah. So I think that's what's different.
And I would add, usually the town administrator section in the code is more like the police chief selection, where that spells out the duties of the town experience. And I think that's a problem right now, who hires and fires and all that kind of stuff. And interestingly enough, we have a big discussion going on the managers list right now about hiring authority and how it's spelled out in the code. So I saved the best language for us later. It's being shared, but yeah, usually it's much more spelled out, so it's very good. Town administrator does this. And, you know, what I'm noticing is that the public is confused too. They want to come in and tell me how the town should have a different policy. And I've been saying, no, you go to the board, and express that, or they didn't like how something was done. You need to complain to the board. It doesn't, staff members don't arbitrate or change their direction based on the citizen. So I think once we get a clearer structure, it will help you also with the community.
Yeah, that's a very good point about that list of town manager duties and powers. If you get a really clear list for that, and then you have what the board retains, being all executive and administrative powers, except those delegated to town administrator. That makes a lot more sense, right? And you can then, if the town administrator can't find certain authority on that list, she comes to you and asks you. So it works a lot more efficient. Yeah.
I want to talk about something that happened to me about maybe 15 to 20 years ago. I was on the personnel committee and we had a clerk that was having troubles. And the board went into executive session without inviting her, which was legal, but they decided to let her go. The town administrator didn't want to do that. And so the town administrator asked the mayor to do that. And then the mayor came to me and asked me to do that. This is a hot potato. Had to stop somewhere. And so I went ahead and talked to her. I've fired a number of people in my corporate life and I've do it gently. So I did it. Was that correct or was that wrong?
Well, I'm not sure what the code said back then or any of the policies, but what I will say is if the board had that authority and it hadn't been delegated to anyone else, the next step would be to look at whether that was properly delegated to the personnel committee. Personnel committee, we'll talk about how that could have been problematic in of itself, just the existence of the personnel committee. But I would say that without knowing what exactly happened, I would say that there probably wasn't a delegation of authority that authorized you to do that in that instance, just because that would have had to come from the board if the board had retained that power, or from the town administrator had that delegated to the town administrator, or from the personnel committee. So there was just that hot potato, I think, resulted in a breach of the organizational structure. That would be my suspicion. And I would just say you should have been able to answer that question clearly by looking at the town's written policies and the ordinances. And if you couldn't, then that's where you have to question whether you should have done it or not. And that's where you can get in trouble.
So I have a more recent example that is actually involving Mary and I, and that's the board delegated Mary to hire interim administrator. And then Mary came to me saying, I don't have the energy to do that. I'm really technically active about coming back. So now I'm realizing, and you raised that very issue.
Yeah. And I will say, when you have the void in the town administrator position, it's extremely hard to act quickly. And
Right, and exactly.
And we needed the person on board right away. It's like urgency drove us. So the intent was not to file the action.
Maybe further, Sam, is there a way we could get the slides on the Zoom meeting for YouTube? Awesome.
To share
Okay,
screen.
wait, actually, that's a good question. Stuff like that.
Like I just asked Sandy.
I was gonna say.
Yeah, but, like, like how tight do we want to play that? Like,
Well, no, that's a good point. That's a good point. Yeah, I think things like that, like ministerial things that come up in a meeting like that, I think that's totally appropriate. It's really what we're talking about is public business essentially. Like, you guys can send an email around to each other and around the staff to say, hey, I'm available such and such date for a meeting. And I kind of liken that to that, so.
Yeah, it's the same thing I was thinking. So I was, trying to get a grant put together today and I'm emailing Jeremiah going, Jeremiah, do you have X, Y, and Z? And I'm emailing Cindy going, Cindy, can you answer these questions? It's like, I'm going completely outside Leslie's authority to ask those questions of those staff.
Right, and I think that the board has, in that specific instance, Mary, you've been delegated a lot of the responsibility to do these grant applications and things like that. I think at some point, I think that would be the best for the town administrator to do, right? Have someone who's experienced in that. I know that's one of the things you've been looking for in a town administrator, a permanent one, and if they have that grant writing, you won't have to question that authority anymore. I think it's very uncommon for mayors to do that type of work, So I think when, we can only, the delegation of authority, you've been delegated the authority and the duty to do these grant applications in that instance. Since you're doing those, it's necessarily going to involve some help from some of the staff to get records and to get things like that. So I don't necessarily think you're surpassing the town administrator in that specific instance. Really, you're just asking for information. There's no, what we're more worried about from a legal perspective is providing direction to staff. Thomas asking Sam to put that up on Zoom. That's not really directing staff. He's asking somebody to do something ministerial. He's not asking them to take an action for public business. That's the same with asking a staff member for information that you need to carry out from the board already. So I think that's how we can show those things.
And from a town administrator standpoint, you're going to have different town administrators have different ways of dealing with that. I just feel like in a town government that's small, that it's okay for people to ask for information as long as it doesn't involve work hours. That's where I'd set the line. So if you were to ask a staff member to do a research project that was going to take 4 hours, that's when I would want it to come through the administrator. And that's what I think we talked about when I said setting priorities, because we have these different committees or groups wanting to have staff do work projects, and they already have a full schedule. And I think that's a place that we have to have a discussion on overall, what are your priorities? And then when you want the staff to do a work project, then we have to reword it. So does that make sense? But I don't mind. Some town administrators are just very strict. Everything goes through them, but I just don't think it works in small towns very well.
And I think that just from a more general standpoint, a lot of the times when I'm asked questions, I answer from a legal perspective, right? But Leslie will have a different answer in some instances from an efficiency standpoint, an administrator standpoint. So right there, that might be a reason, not to necessarily even ask staff for information, because maybe the town administrator should get that question first, and knowing the staff's workload already, and maybe that should be town administrator reaches back out to you and says, oh yes, you can get to that, but it won't be for a couple of days or something like that. So moving on to the one boss principle, you might have seen this before in some other training materials. But this is what happens when board members get inappropriate involved in personnel matters. And this is really an efficiency thing. Employees can receive multiple directions from multiple supervisors. If you're thinking about board members as supervisors, you know, they might play one supervisor off the other. Employees might feel they can disregard their superiors in that instance. What if you're reaching down from the board and the town administrator is given different directions? What are they to do in that instance? I think that's a really tough position to be put in. You know, what if the board has given direction and then and the employee feels like they can fully disregard what they've heard from a supervisor? I mean, that just doesn't work. How are you supposed to get things done? So then talking about the one boss principle really is when individual board member directs their direct reports. The board is that group of 6 plus the mayor and one boss. So it's board individually cannot act, right? Only the board is. So if one board member is directing the town administrator, that doesn't work either. So really, even when you can't, even when you have differences of opinion as to how to address an issue with the town administrator, it's your responsibility really to come together and vote on the issue. And whatever the majority vote is, that's the direction from the board. Doesn't matter if you disagree. You know, that's just the board has spoken in that instance. So that's why we talk about it as speaking with one voice. And I think the next slide is questions. So I'm happy to have some more discussion about these principles. Yeah. Oh yeah. Okay. This is the last slide. Yes, thank you. So this is just touching on advisory boards, commissions, and committees. And we've noticed that the town of Paonia has established various committees and advisory boards, a lot of times made up with 2 board members and citizens. And there's some issues with committees and advisory boards because their roles and responsibilities aren't always spelled out, or they feel those bodies fail to adhere to their roles and responsibilities built into roles that are properly delegated to the staff. So that can be very problematic from a liability insurance standpoint. So the largest risk of committees is the assumption of supervisory or oversight relationship with respect to our employee. And we, you know, the personnel committee can be a good example of that. Or, you know, there's I forget exactly what committee it is, but one that has to do with parks, public works, and things like that. We heard the comment that some citizens on that board thought they were the public works director's boss, and you know, that can't be the case, right? it's just it can't be the case. So you know, if you think about it, even from just the fact that you're elected by the citizens of Paonia, you know, they can't then, they've elected you, but now they think that they're going to direct staff. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. So the issues with that is it's not spelled out in the town's enactments, the ordinances, resolutions, written policies. And that means that there's significant personal risks of committee member in taking any sort of action. And the worst one probably being, and most opportunity for liability, is attempt to take an adverse job action. And what if you sought to terminate an employee as someone on that personnel committee when you don't have any authority to do that? I mean, that, you know, those types of lawsuits, the personnel lawsuits, they drag out for years. I don't know the extent to which this board has experience with those. Yeah, okay. Well, it seems like, you know, it does seem like employees just sue them as a matter of course. So it's becoming even more risk. The first source of usually appoint the employment attorney, because municipal attorneys, we just don't have enough time to do all that stuff. So what will happen is the first thing is they look through your personnel policies, they look through your ordinances. Where do you have the authority to have taken that action? What kind of disciplinary process do you have? Oh, none. Then how are you supposed to handle this? How did you fire this person? Or what are you going to do before you fire them if they can soon enough to protect the town in that instance? And you don't have those clear policies, they have a really hard time doing their jobs.
So Nick, do you think we ought to codify our committees?
I think if you're going to keep your committees, I think they should be, if not codified, at least a resolution spelling out very clearly their roles and responsibilities. And then they need to adhere strictly to those roles and responsibilities.
And this is a point where the staff is very confused and it's hurting you. I'll give you two examples. I guess there was a building that was damaged and I asked why we had, because we had received some money, why we haven't repaired it. And they said, well, we're waiting to go to this committee to see what they want to do. That's not where you go. You go, if the staff has a question about that, it goes to the town administrator. And if it's not like a routine day-to-day thing, it's something where do we want to put this building back up or not? And it could involve policy and the way the park's used. It goes to the board. You can ask a committee for input, but it should not be going from the staff to the committee. And then we had another one where the CDPHE had asked the department to do a test. And what I heard was we have to go to the committee to see if they want to do the test. And I said, oh no, you do the test. CDPA, speaks, you do the test. So the staff is very confused. And I had another situation where a committee instructed somebody for me to go talk to an elected official about getting an MOU. There was a whole bunch of problems with that. First of all, the board has not decided they want an MOU. We were fact finding on whether this was a possibility to resolve a problem to bring to the board. MOUs are in there. Second of all, town administrators are staff. It's staff to staff, elected to elected. So for me to reach out to an elected official without you delegating that to me would have been really overstepping my bounds. Does that make sense? So there's a lot of confusion about, the authorities and it has resulted in the staff feeling like they can't move forward to finish anything. And I think once they understand that they respond to their department head responds to the town administrator, with the exception of the police department, the police chief, who goes directly to the board, then you're going to see things move along quicker that you wanted to move along. Because that's where I got alarmed, is I realized that staff was not moving ahead because they felt like they had to get approvals from all these different levels instead of just the staff person right above them.
So echoing on what Leslie just said, historically, committees did not act on their own. They acted when an item was referred to them by the board. Function of the board, for example, the flag policy going to streets, or if the town administrator came to a committee and asked the committee to do something. That occurred when John Norris was a town administrator. He knew which items would be hot political potatoes. He would pass it to the committee, and then we would deal with it and report back to him. But the committee never interacted with staff directly. The closest I see of committees interacting with staff would be the finance committee sitting down with the officer, cutting checks.
But I think for that is within the board's purview, and all you're doing is getting all the detailed information. So you can go back to the board and say, if they haven't, like if it happened at the last meeting, they have a question on an invoice, we looked into that and we feel that's legitimate or whatever.
We held the check.
Yeah, the committees have evolved differently over time. I know when I first got on the board, it was on the Public Works Committee. I mean, we met, every week with Travis and the town administrator and just discussed stuff. So, and the only things that were ever referred to us was if we had contracts and RFPs, we look over, bids and stuff like that, and then make a recommendation to the board. But yeah, no, a lot of these we were directed, Travis didn't do.
That, some of that might have happened when we didn't have a town manager under Neil Schreederman. So some information got lost through a period of time. There was the structure committees that had lasted for decades, and then it gradually fell apart. And we're trying to reboot those. And I think Nick's right, we need to have them at least by resolution. When I made the motion to restart the committees, I didn't push for a resolution or anything because I didn't know if it was going to work. And I prefer to experiment first before crunching it into law. So maybe we're getting closer to being able to make a law.
And frankly, I'd like to reshuffle the things. I thought the DAPS committee was a really good thing, because government affairs and public safety, and they did some really good stuff. I mean, they held the Let's Talk meeting and had public and give input on different things. And it bridged a couple of different areas that kind of fall between the cracks now. So.
And the other place for committees I thought were important was allowing the citizens to have somebody to come talk to. And whenever I sat down with citizens, they asked to talk to a committee. I always started out with a preamble that said that there's two of us here. We don't have full authority. The board has authority, so that they knew where it sat. And that if it wasn't resolved in committee, some cases could be resolved real easy, like someone wants to put a tap on a line that's overtaxed, and town administrators always said, no, nobody can go on that line. We just pass that information along. But in other cases, we take their information and report it out to the board in case the board wants to make a decision.
One thing that I like to do instead of codifying the boards, commissions, committees, is place in the town's ordinances something that just says the board has the authority to establish such boards and commissions as the board desires by resolution. That way you have that enacting authority, and then it'll flow down from the ordinance, and to establish the rules, responsibilities in addition to establishing. And perhaps, boards change, of course. So perhaps spelling out what that resolution needs to say. It needs to clearly spell out the roles and responsibilities and say that that board is advisory in character only and is responsible to only the board in providing advice, and has no, and then talk about what authority these advisory boards do not have, directing staff, etc. So it might be a good ordinance to have if the board does desire to continue having boards and commissions in an advisory character.
Your final bullet point should be on every committee's.
Yeah.
It should be read at every committee meeting.
Yeah.
And also just add on that you have no direction of staff.
Yeah.
Period.
Yeah. I think
And
that's
that will end all of it.
Yeah.
It really is what we need to codify, I think,
Yeah.
in a way. We need it to be very well clear and well spelled out.
And I really like Dave's suggestion that, committees only serve, with the exception of probable finance. Committees only serve when something is referred to, that they don't meet on a regular basis. They don't do that. They only exist when something is referred.
We never used to meet on a regular basis. I have found that the Citizens Water Committee, which Thomas headed this last time, has been really valuable. So that's a regular meeting, but it's.
But I think it's serving as getting information out to people when the people disseminate
Yeah.
information. So it's really valuable.
What I find the committees are most useful for is it's more of an informal way of communicating with the citizens and getting their concerns to the board without several hours of 50 people standing up and taking their 3 minutes to complain to the board. And I think regular meetings in that function work. It works out quite well. They have a time that they know it's going to meet. They can meet with us. And if they have a problem, they can just bring it up rather than we go through the process of they contact the committee and we have to schedule a meeting. And that kind of gets clumsy and awkward. You know, if we have a meeting and it only lasts 5 minutes because nobody's there, there's no issue, that's not a problem. It wastes 5 minutes of my time, but that's not huge. Versus we waste hours in town meetings with most of this stuff. And I mean, I've wasted virtually months of my life on this in the past, being on the council before, and because the meetings just go on entirely too long.
The one issue I would have with that, and I'm not clear about it, is the one that I think I expressed to you last time, that I was getting this correspondence from public citizens. They wanted me to do something, and I would write back, thank you for your correspondence. It will be placed on the board agenda. Is that if someone's expressing an opinion, it does need to go to the whole board. So, you know, reporting back out. I mean, I don't know if you've had anything about that. If Mrs. Jones comes and says, you know, I am upset with the potholes on whatever avenue, and that isn't conveyed to the board with her name with it, is that a problem? Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, it could be problematic, and I don't think that it is necessarily from a liability standpoint. My thought is, you know, maybe it's like a game of telephone, and is it efficient in that sense? You know, I think a lot of boards will have citizens to try not to have as many comments during the public meeting for shorter meetings. So they'll invite public comment by email and to have them submitted for the packet ahead of time. So that's one way that you might lessen public comment. But I think, you know, as long as it's clear, let's say you have that committee setting, or that the example that you're giving right now sounds kind of like a town hall, you know, that you would have with a candidate for the presidential election or something. And that's not necessarily from a legal standpoint a bad thing. I don't think you have any real obligation legally to make sure that you're paraphrasing that perfectly to the rest of the board. But is it most efficient? I don't know, because, you know, things get lost in translation. You know, you'd have to be really detailed in what you're doing to make sure that all gets conveyed to the rest of the board. But, you know, from a legal standpoint, I don't think it's necessarily an issue.
So I see that information gathering function of committees as really the primary benefit. The someone, if I can, like, we're just hearing that we have, you know, who you need to talk to. You sometimes know when you're going to meet, and then we don't all have to get together and spend all of our time and all of our, you know, attorney's time and town administrator's time hearing Mrs. Jones talk about the potholes. You know, I think that function is really the value of the committee structure to me. But aside from that, it sounds like we have a couple of aspects of this problem that kind of work interdependently. So we have language in the code, which is somewhat messy, you know, thankfully we have Nick to identify this and help us with it. On the other side of it, we have education, and that's happening to all of us right here now, but then also needs to happen to the public as well as staff. So everybody understands how this is supposed to work. And then the third part that I think is really the trick is changing our behavior. Because we can write down what we want to happen and we can tell everybody what we want to happen. The trick is doing it. And putting it to practice, I think, is going to be the real work. Like the rest of this has to happen. But if nothing changes and the way that we're doing business, then why would we even try? Right? So hopefully we can all, and I'm as guilty as anybody else here. This is Leslie brought up an example that it was me, right? That was me. And I thought about it at the time and I was like, oh, is that instruction? You know, is this advice? Is this like, how does this work? And in retrospect, probably shouldn't have done it that way. But at the time, it wasn't like you needed this. So my bad, you know, sorry. I'm sure that nothing that will happen out of that. But if we don't change how we work, we're wasting our time here. Without changing.
The way I look at it, Thomas, is that if you can step back from all that, then you can deal with what you really need to deal with, which is the overall work priorities for staff. You know, I mentioned that we might do a retreat on that, because that to me is your function. You decide how much time, you know, do you want Public Works to focus their first priority on sidewalk repair? I mean, my guess is that right now you want Public Works staff to work on water and sewer, but that's where that happens, is that you know, the department heads get together and they say, this is what we're planning for this year. We need your input on where we should focus our time. And then, you know, I think the police department is a little different because they have to do what they have to do. But, you know, a typical thing that I've seen towns do is, do we want a community policing policy? Do we want, you know, these kinds of overall ways that we want to handle enforcement? It'll free up your time to focus on that and not on the little stuff.
Thank you, this is raising a real important point. We tried to do a change. First time we tried it, it was undone. And so we have to, as a board, commit to the process and stay with that process instead of undoing it immediately. So that's the problem. Each of us need to hold each other accountable. Maybe give me some feedback after class meeting. She was absolutely right about that. When we step out of line, she did it, which I really appreciate. And those are the things where we need to hold each other accountable. We need to hold ourselves to stay in this.
And I'm going to bring up something about that. Is the next day the Public Works Department was showed up in my office at 8 and said we didn't know anything about this. And if you're going to plan on getting money for park facilities, you need to talk to them, because they're going to tell you exactly what that means for, because it will mean hiring other staff. So that kind of information, which I think everybody's agreed on now, and you've got a process to work that out. You've got to think those things through before you. Yes, let's have a skate park. Oh, let me tell you, skate parks are way more complicated. And I have questions for Nick eventually about, I know that the district feels that they're insured, but they're on town property. So I don't know if the district, being a leasee, having insurance is enough if you own the property underneath it. And I think that's a discussion, you know, that you have to, legal aspect. There were a lot of questions that when I heard that discussion, I thought, oh my goodness, we are just jumping to the point final before all this other stuff had been worked out. But we did put together a plan, and you're going to meet. So those are the kinds of things that I would like to see Or the way that you can interact with your staff is to say, you know, if we do this, what does that mean for you? It's a lot of more work and it's going to entail hiring more staff, whether it's a whole person or not. So those are the kinds of things that we need to think about. And as Thomas said, it's going to take a change of behavior. And, you know, I'll give you another example. The tree board called me, the president of the tree board called me and said, we want to come in and talk to Corey about what sidewalks he should be working on. Well, that is not. So that goes to the board, and I had a long discussion with the president about making bullet points, say these are our goals for this year's, and here's what we would like to ask the staff to do, and then it goes to the board. That didn't happen, but I think that's kind of the proper relationship with a commission and the board, not to go directly to the public works director and say fix these sidewalks. The board, because ultimately, to me, those are what the staff is doing their overall work on is part of the implementation of your policies. So you have to be involved in that. And I would never delegate the personnel policies to the town administrator. I didn't know anybody did that. That has not happened on any job I've ever had. That's a board responsibility. I take it down to if you want to put up speed signs or change the speed or put up parking control signs that weren't there before, that's a board. Just to me, that's a policy decision. And then the staff goes and gets the signs. We don't make the decision, oh, we think this should be 35 instead of 20. And that goes to you.
We think there should be a stop sign down on that.
Right. That goes to you. And then we order the signs. So that way you're making all these decisions to make sure the town's run orderly, but you're not having to order the signs.
Exactly. That was a really good example of what it is. You ask for the sign, and you agree that there needs to be a sign, so
Right.
please buy the sign and put it up. Don't put the sign up and then we hear from people that there's a stop sign.
Yeah.
What? Thank you.
I think that kind of raises another point as well, because all of this function is predicated on expertise. So you have to make sure that, like, I don't know, if there's a check the boxes kind of a thing or how it works, but making sure that we have people with expertise would go a long way, I think, to establishing the trust, which I think is really the crux of this whole talk today, right? Is missing trust and earning it back, kind of what I'm reading. So I think that that's a key aspect, is that we have expertise at this moment. It's helping us move forward.
And it looks like we're getting better candidates for the town administrator in this round. Are you getting more too?
Just one today.
Yeah, I mean, the few that I looked at, they look like better selection. Oh, good, yeah.
If I might add one thing, a little different perspective on the committees. Two things. First, trying to clarify and piggyback on what Thomas said. I was in that meeting. I didn't really take it as direction. It just seemed like the best solution at the time. So I think a lot of that is more educational about how the process works. So that really can probably be shared amongst all of us. And that's part of what we're here for. The other part is one of the real benefits as a department for me, for the committees, is I get to take stuff to them and ask them thoughts, questions, concerns, comments before we take that and throw that out to everybody and get peppered with questions that we may not have time perfect. I get to kind of rely on some of their expertise, some of their community involvement before we just get to right now. Let's bring this up and let's have this open discussion immediately. Helps me prepare and sometimes look down the road a little bit. So that's the value as a department head of the committee, is getting to communicate with members of the board ahead of time. I think that's specific to the police department. Or that wouldn't be appropriate. Finance director. Something like that would be a different role. Right, yeah. Like Corey, that wouldn't make sense for Corey to have a committee, right? Public safety, where it's direct report. I think that It's not even coaching or correcting, it's assigning the functions.
But I'd like to make it clear that no policy decisions or even advice
Yeah.
are given in the meeting, but we bring it to the board, and that's why there's a report every single meeting. This is what we heard, and this is what we did.
Our big decision is,
Yeah.
put that in your report.
Yeah, which is.
There's not much editing.
That's written report. That line that I put in the traditional chain of command, committees, arrow, board.
Yeah.
So, but actually, we work for the board as a information gathering thing. And I try to make it clear that we don't make decisions at all. We'll bring this to the board. That's what it's for. And I think that's the most useful thing for a committee of all.
So Leslie, Nick, guys, how you guys understand? We should be operating, or is that how we should be operating as sounding board say? Is a good way to put it for direct reports, or how does like what's the? Yeah, well, it's interesting. I work for a larger city on I guess it's in the Front Range, and they have all sorts of advisory boards and commissions, and they have in their act that's and that these boards are all advisory in capacity, and it sounds like a lot of the committees are operating that way here. And I think that based on what I'm hearing tonight, that these committees are actually very useful for certain things. So I think that there would be less risk if all of that authority were clearly spelled out somewhere in policies. And I don't think my recommendation would necessarily be do fully away with the committees. It sounds like they do serve important functions. So yes, information gathering and being clear, maybe having a statement that's just general that you read at the beginning of the meetings to make very clear that you don't have any authority to act with students as have an agenda, something where this is the purpose of tonight's meeting, and think about the authority that's in your enactment for that particular advisory board or committee. And you know, have my biggest recommendation. I know you've talked, some board members today have talked about how it's going to meet regularly with these committees and to have citizen input. But I think what would be best is having that direction first come down from the board and having that delegated to a committee. We want you to get information from citizens. We want you to we want you to take questions from department ahead of time and kind of flesh these issues out. Having that come down from the top down structure, I think is that's how you don't get outside of your job description. So I don't know what else to do. I don't know what thoughts are on those trips.
Oh, I think, that as long as the committees are defined, and I know where this came from, and I mean, I thought it was two old things about, one was I think it was the water committee, and I can't remember what the other one was, but they clearly had functions in there that they should not be having. It was old documents, and they looked like they were all just by the government. Yeah. So I realized, and everybody's been on this track, so this is a big change. I don't think we're saying anybody's been doing anything wrong, been doing the way things maybe were done. But what I do have a question about this airport.
That's a
because they have duties that they shouldn't have because from what I read in IGA, the county totally controls that airport budget. It talks about they have to form a 5-year and a 10-year master plan. those are required by the FAA, but not from somebody who doesn't have control over the airport. And there's weird things in there, as if the town owns the airport. That's the way it reads. I think we really have to revisit that, because that's really confusing.
Okay, well,
Well, the town is the majority stockholder.
yeah, it's like property owner, but then there's different control because.
Yeah,
but-
owns money.
But they have, the way that they read that, it's like they have absolute operations authority, and the
No.
town does not have.
Yeah, yeah, it's like the county controls the money, the town has the property.
Right, I worked for several towns where we managed the airport.
Oh.
And the things that you have in there as responsibilities are the responsibilities of the people that control the airport,
Okay.
but not of an advisory committee for just a property owner.
So the county has indicated that we will be funding the airport at some time.
No,
No, the county actually is the one that, so the county is the one that has the majority, because there's 1% tax that is passed, that really funds that area. There's the cell phone power income that comes through, there's gas that's sold in the containers and whatever, and it's really, the majority of that money comes from cell phone towers.
Okay, my understanding was the county was handing over operations to us.
no.
It was exactly the opposite, from what I could see of the history of the IGAs.
Yeah.
That at one time, the town did have some participation, but the most recent IGA, the county's taken full authority, and they made it very clear in the IGA.
Yes.
All right, so.
There's just one more thing I'd like to bring up, that we have not been operating that we hire a police chief. So if that is going to be the case, when we vote in a meeting, I would really appreciate some guidance on how the Board of Trustees does that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I'll mention that there are small towns that the manager in Walsenburg, I supervise the police department. I think it's better the way your code has it, where the police chief stands on their own, just because I know of a couple of incidents. Florence is the big one, where the town manager was committing crimes. And then when you're the supervisor of the police department and you are the person who the police department needs to intervene with, that's kind of odd. And so I just have come to the conclusion that I think the police chief does need to be a direct report of the board. It's
No, it was originally, it was changed when,
Scotland.
yeah, and then Jane Berry came in, and Jane Berry was the one that convinced the board to give her.
I think it's better to be a director. That's just my feeling. I don't know if you've had any experience with that, but over the years, I've been on both sides of that, and that's my.
Yeah, I don't have any direct experience with issues stemming from a town manager or administrator being the boss essentially of this chief, but I think it makes sense because the duties are pretty distinct, right? And having a town manager who has really the expertise in law enforcement, and that is the chief of police. It's not the town manager or town administrator. So I think it just makes sense from that standpoint in general.
Be directly.
Yes, yeah.
Your code is unclear, but it is more clear than other parts of the code. Please, yes.
I Well, I just want to tell you when all that was going on, I'm kind of like, wait a minute, I had said, Corinne, it says right here. There was one piece of code left that said we had authority and he acquiesced to only a small degree. And we were kind of like, okay, but we're glad we have, but it was a struggle because it was unclear as to who had authority to do the hiring.
And your
Because we
code is
did not.
Your code is riddled.
Yes, the mess.
Nick, but I read his original thing, and under the town administrator thing, it said clear, question mark, as mud.
No, I didn't know you guys.
Never done a comprehensive overview. And we just keep adding things and never take anything out. Yeah, you know, that's the problem. That's the problem with having amateurs running with that. You know, and you're.
And the other thing you need to know, and Nick will tell you this, is that when you pass a new ordinance that's different than your old ordinance, you need to rescind the. old ordinance. That is not a problem.
Yeah, that's. And take a, you know, there's more times than you think, than you could possibly think about it. It's the code when you change, even, let's say we're changing something in chapter 2, this probably is. But you change something in one chapter of the code, it could have a cascade effect and, all of a sudden, none of the rest of the code works. So you really have to make sure you're paying attention to, and you know, your attorney will have the tools to just say, look, the board wants to do this. All right, I'm going to word search all of these terms. I'm going to cross-reference. I'm going to look at all the cross-references, every section of the code, every time I draft an ordinance, you know, so it's something that you want to delegate that to your attorney just to do that work. Yeah, and I'm happy to do it. So, yeah, so my thought, just to kind of, my thought about moving forward and closing on roles and responsibilities here is to first take a look at the code. And that doesn't mean we can't look at the personnel policies at the same time, but the personnel policies really need to be consistent with the code. And I think of doing the code first because it's the highest document that you have here, other than the statutes, which you can't change. So you look at the code, we determine the structure at that time, we make changes to chapter 2, and we make all of the different authority clear. Here's the board's authority. Basically, it's everything that the town receives through the statutes is vested in the board, and then down from there, the board delegates authority to certain staff members, the administrator, and the police chief. Right now, I think there does need to be a town attorney section. I think that would be great as well. Most codes have that. That would help me determine my authority and what I'm able to do without receiving further board direction. Usually we'll say the attorney shall draft the ordinances of the town, shall review the contracts, et cetera. And then all of that becomes clear. And then, you know, some codes, we might go as far as to talk about department head responsibilities, officers, things like that. Or, you know, if you don't want to put things like that in the code because you want to have more flexibility in changing duties and responsibilities, I would say department heads could be spelled out in personnel policies instead, but I would have at least the town's officers spelled out in the code as well. That would make it much clearer to everyone what's going on. Yeah. So that would be my first thought. And then I want to be able to come forward to you with some other recommendations, prioritize what other parts of the code need some changes, because there are a lot, to be frank. And I think really the most immediate issue is chapter 2. After that, I think the zoning and the subdivision codes, and I would also think it would make sense to look at the finance chapter, just to be sure that there's nothing in there that's sort of conflicting with state statutes, that it's absolutely clear what taxes you're supposed to be collecting and that are town. So those are my top 4 right now. But I think that taking a look at the code is an important thing to do.
And I think Matt has some other areas that he'd like us to work on and confusing for the police department.
Okay. Yeah, and I certainly not set in stone with that sort of, but title, chapter 2 is very important. And, you know, if there's something that the town would have a hard time enforcing or prosecuting, I think that gets bumped up the list as well.
So I think we may come back with some specific questions about, you know, who you want to delegate hiring authority to and that kind of thing at your regular. But I started to set up a matrix of the current code and the problems and today. So we could work together on them. And I also called my colleagues and asked them who they thought the most functional small town codes are. Steal, but I steal from the very best.
Yeah.
You don't need to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah, well, I think the next thing I had was a discussion scenario, and Sam, I know you haven't been having to do this lately. Thank you. Yeah, this is really extreme scenario, but I think it will help illustrate some of the principles. So board adopts the following motion 42. I move the public works director repair the town hall roof as soon as possible. The roof had recently started leaking, and while there were suspicions as to the cause, it had yet to be determined. Next slide, please. Public works director was not at the board meeting, but was made aware of the motion. He was aware the contractor had constructed the roof by the town with a 5-year warranty on the construction and had passed through a 10-year manufacturer's warranty covering material defects. Both warranties are still effective. Public works director called the construction contractor was to meet the director the following week to perform an inspection to determine whether the leak was caused by a defect in the construction. Slide. In the meantime, trustee Mustard observes the roof has not been repaired. He calls trustee Peacock to relay his concern that the public works director had not acted on the board's adopted motion. Trustee Mustard then drives to the public works director's office to confront him. The public works director explains he's pursuing a warranty claim with the construction contractor. Pursue a separate claim with the manufacturer. The leak is determined not to have been caused by a defect in construction. Somewhat persuaded, but concerned about forecasted rainfall, trustee Mustard orders the public works director to fix the tarp to the roof to cover the leak. Public works director explains work performed on the roof could invalidate one or both the warranties and refuses the order. Frustrated, Mustard leaves to call Peacock again to discuss his outrage that the director would not follow the board's motion in Mustard's ensuing order. After speaking with another trustee, trustee Plum, trustee Peacock calls the public works director to inform him that she and trustee Plum support Mustard's direction and that the board will hold the public works director accountable if the town hall sustains internal damage due during the forecasted rainstorm. The director observes clouds rolling in and winds picking up. While he knows that fixing the tarp to the roof could invalidate warranties, feels the pressure and fears the consequences of failing to cover the leak. Director starts gathering up his equipment, feeling the winds pick up even more. The director knows that his roof tarp just won't do the job. So he grabs a ladder, a roof tarp, some tarp and anchor boards, some screws. Director climbs the ladder, it's on the roof. It's now raining heavily and the winds are even stronger than before. The director manages to fix the tarp using the anchor boards and the screws. He has to remove some shingles and drill additional holes to get the job done. Carrying the drill, shingles and unused supplies, the director reaches the ladder, turns around to begin his descent when he's hit with a powerful gust of wind. He steps down a rung to stabilize himself. The rung is wet from the rain, causing the director to slip. Dropping everything in his arms, he tries to grab for anything that might stop his fall. Unable to do so, he falls all the way to the ground. Having sustained a broken leg and wrist, the director sues the town and trustee Mustard, trustee Peacock, trust on the damages. Board asserts the Workers' Compensation Act prohibits the suit as against the town, and to the extent that it doesn't, the suit is barred by the CGIA. Mustard, Peacock, and Plum assert the town must indemnify them under the CGIA, and that the town's insurance policy should cover the defense costs of any damages against them should the lawsuit proceed. Sorry, this is long. The next board meeting, the mayor and trustees are informed of the details of the incident in the lawsuit. They're also informed the work performed by the director has invalidated the warranties on the roof, and that it was likely the town's insurance wouldn't cover the costs of repairing the leak or any internal damage to the town hall that occurred after the tarp flew off during a rainstorm. The mayor and trustees not involved in the incidents are furious with the trustees that were involved and want to hold them personally liable for both the public works director's injuries and the cost to repair the roof and internal damage to the town. Right, that's the long phase. Okay, so I have some questions, but I think I'm hopeful that these will lead to a good discussion on these issues. So first, and Sam, I might ask you to move back some slides, but I'll try not to. The motion, I think, if I remember properly or correctly, was that, yeah, the motion was to have the public works director repair the roof leak as soon as possible. And was that motion proper? Oh,
Yeah.
that was not.
Yeah, it should not have been
Yeah.
the public works director to do anything, it should have directed the town administrator.
Right. Right, and it's sort of a trick question, because who has the authority in the town code to actually over public works and public buildings? Yeah, it's the town administrator. So should the board have even given that order in that instance to the town administrator? Right, right. So, right. So, you know, if there is a leak, it's going to be obvious, it was in this room. You know, the public works director is going to be on that, right? So it's kind of an outlandish scenario, an extreme one. But that it wouldn't have been proper for two reasons, maybe more. One is that public things are already trusted town administrator, and town administrator is not on that already, then you have a bigger problem, right? So then it passed the chain of command down to the town administrator with board direction. So that's the trick question. What motion would have been better? No motion, probably, because you know, that authority has been delegated to town administrator already. So was the post motion direction from trustee Mustard? Yeah. So trustee Mustard kind of went out. I mean, really, he was already following a faulty motion, and then took it upon himself to further direct the public works director without any further board action. But as we knew, the board action was improper in the first place. And you can see why in this instance, you know, I tried in this example to show the public works director had a lot more knowledge, right, than the board did about the issue, knew about the, you know, very intimately about the warranties, and also about what he needed to do once he got on the roof. He couldn't bring up the you know, the tarp, just an adhesive tarp, needed special anchoring equipment to do it, and knew that would put further holes in the roof, and had to take shingles off, and all of that was just bad. And perhaps if not micromanaged, would have done things differently and better. So was trustee Peacock also? I think these ones were this one was a softball. So I guess the trustee Plum, I think, is a a harder question. Trustee Plum didn't actually direct anyone, was just trustee Peacock said, oh, we were the ones, or she called trustee Plum and said to Mustard, we agree with you, and then Mustard passed that along. What might have happened there is no meetings law violation. And the reason is because you have that game of telephone happening, and I forget, I'm blanking on what they're calling that, like serial meetings. Yeah, that's the serial meetings issue.
Then on top of that, you have no authority to make policy or any decision outside of a meeting that's been agendized.
Right, exactly. Yeah, so then I guess here's the larger question. Will these trustees that have been personally sued be entitled to defense and indemnification by the town against the public work director's lawsuit under the CGIA? I think it's very unlikely that they would be entitled to that, because I think what would likely happen, right, is these other trustees are wanting to now hold these trustees who engaged in this direction improperly accountable for what happened. So can those other trustees, the mayor, hold those other trustees involved in the incident personally liable for the public work director's injuries? And I think the answer is yes. And I'm saying I think just because, you know, it would be subject to litigation and there would be lots of legal questions and fact finding that would occur. But I think, yes, the town could hold those involved personally liable. And really what the result is, you know, potentially millions of dollars there. It's a pretty big loss because you can claim pain and suffering damages and things like that. It's not just going to be hospital bills. It's going to be permanent disability, all sorts of things. And you know, I threw in the insurance issue, workers' compensation. You know, you could say that workers' compensation bars on the job injuries. But was that really an on-the-job injury because they were directed by someone who was their boss? So, and then the costs to repair the roof and the internal damage to the town hall.
Wouldn't those damages be, it's not the town's decision, wouldn't that be Sursa's decision?
That's what.
So absolutely, you know, so the damages are, you mean to repair the roof or
Repair the roof and the personal.
Yeah, so in this instance, Sursa would step in and be defending the town. They would have appointed an adjuster, an attorney at that point. Yeah, so I guess using the term town loosely to include its insurer in that instance. But yeah, that's how I think it would play out in detail. And you know, that would be a pretty bad lawsuit for the town. So yeah, but you know, you can see that happening in even a smaller setting. You know, if somebody's directed to go out and fix a fire hydrant by a member of the board and breaks the fire hydrant and damages the vehicle with a stream of water or something like that, that's another cost that the town could incur. And that trustee that made the direction could then be personally sued by the person whose car was damaged, and the town would say no. Source would say we're not going to indemnify it, and you're going to have to get your own attorney and pay for the pocket. So,
There'd be some issues around the public works director taking direction that he knows was not best practices and engaging in something that was unsafe on his own liabilities. Yeah, so essentially we have a 3 or 4 year lawsuit here.
yeah, that's absolutely true. Because, you know, and then there's also the issue of, you know, negligence suits. You have the town as CGI protection, but those individual trustees wouldn't necessarily have that protection and wouldn't in that instance. Because they have acted outside the scopes of their authority. But the town of course would assert the CGI protection. And then also if it proceeded beyond the period of the immunity protections, and they actually allow the lawsuit to proceed, which I think happened against the town, but against the trustees, then you would look at comparative negligence. Should the trustee not have done that? Was there any fault or should the public works director not have gotten despite what they were? I think goes both ways, you know, and that's fine. So, you know, if you have that clear authority, everyone knows what they're supposed to do, then you can more easily determine fault.
He wasn't following best practices.
So I want to offer a helpful way that you can do that. And I'm going to use you as an example. So Dave sends me this article about Houston and says, well, I can't remember what did we have a plan B?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
The generator.
So that is a good way to let the town administrator know, hey, I saw a leak in the roof. You also told me about the arch, which is in the SGM capital improvement plan, the facade of town hall needs attention.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've seen the arch where the brick is separated from the, yeah. So, you know, it's fine for you to email individually the town administrator and say, hey, I noticed the brick is flowing up from the arch. Just want to make sure. Then I can tell you, with the arch, I think everybody knows that. With the generator, the public works people did not know about it. And I emailed them, they knew the generator was there, but it had never been installed.
Right.
And we don't have generators on our other facilities and you need them. So that started the process with us talking to the engineers about getting us sizing for those. And there is a very good grant available to buy those generators. So it does not mean that you should not be talking to the administrator about, I saw, you know, the roof panel is off. What did someone taking care of that? Definitely tell us, because we need as many eyes on those kinds of things as we can. The issue is that they took it under their hands to be the supervisor of the public works director. Right. So I don't want to, that's the way, if you see things like that, or, you know, the sidewalk, I don't know, we actually got the citizen complaint about the tree. Yeah. And then we can investigate that. So that is helpful for you to do that.
So Leslie has given the conclusions to the question of what could have been done different.
Oh, sorry.
No. That's perfect. And really it was simple. It was just tell the town administrator and you know, there were emergent circumstances here, but the town administrator has the authority in the code to handle the situation. And would have presumably asked the public works director or another staff member to have done that immediately, or, you know, and then had that internal discussion, figured out the best option. Was there a way to do it without damaging the roof and validating the warranty? There probably was. So, yeah.
And in that case, I would have emailed back the public works directors on it.
Yeah.
And the best practice in that would have been to light a fire under the contractor and say, look, there's going to be more damages if you don't get here immediately and ameliorate this problem, right?
Yeah.
But we've had Nick craft a letter to the contractor. And then when you come out with the town attorney stationery.
Yes, well, I've had to write a lot of letters like that, and this, just so you all know, I didn't know about the situation in town hall and the art separation or anything like that, but in another client municipality of ours, there was work done by staff in an emergency where to repair a roof and water got in and destroyed all their electrical, and it was in their water treatment plant, and it was costing hundreds of thousands of dollars to repair the electrical. But meanwhile, they previously had been on the roof to install lightning rods. And even though this leak had nothing to do with that had invalidated. Yeah, so they get you with that stuff. So, yeah, you gotta be really careful. Well, that's the end of the roles and responsibilities portion of this, and it's been a long time. So I think the other part of the discussion will be shorter, so maybe we take a break for.
Sure.
Yeah, 5 minutes. Okay. Yeah.
It's for you.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Means the board is not it's not legal.
And so if they talk about Thanksgiving dinner.
This is not first the law.
And that came up really, agree. I know, stop signs are good, I don't. Even with the change to town without.
Take that of me. Take that of the board.
Is that?
The state was sitting by the board. And if stop sign was discussed at the board level. Not the one that was the Matthews framework was never a decisions. But it was never decided upon that board. Oh, have you researched how it works? I think it needs to go.
Well, here. We just learned this. That is. Yeah, I'm going to talk about efficiency. Don't know, I'll double check. I don't know.
Oh, God.
Tell you that.
They're not supposed to tell them about what they think they're having a license before.
Yeah. We're trying to get to get you in trouble really quick.
Being short.
Here, you were saying so much, I'm like, I'm gonna just tell you that there's a meeting and I hear you so that you will.
Longer than it's like, and then I got this some home.
Start with me, I didn't even hear half what you said.
Yeah. Cell towers, I think.
I'm just trying to let you know that.
I knew it was coming.
You need it.
Yeah.
I hate them. What's the ass? Slept like that. I didn't even hear my whole alarm. I mean, I must have. I can tell people. I know I've got about just 90%. Authenticity. That I don't know. So who's you?
Well, I mean, keep it off, I do have a short presentation. Try to get you out of here ASAP.
Thank you.
Have you guys, real quick, have you ever said, or, you know,
Yes.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah. There's too much space. Farm fresh eggs. I felt it's a shame that.
Oh, well.
New batteries. Yeah, this one will be, 13 slides, so. Yeah, well. Yeah, so this second half of the presentation here is about board meeting structure, and we'll get right into it. The topics, I just wanted to start with as the attorney, the legal requirements, and then talk a little bit about public participation in board meetings and the current policies and practices and potential policy changes. So this is the statement, the declaration of policy from the open meetings law, and basically just saying that public policy is public business and can't be conducted in secret. Public has to be invited. So all meetings of a quorum of 3 or more members, I know you've seen this before, whichever is, or a quorum, whichever is fewer, at which any public business is discussed, or at which any formal action may be taken, are declared to be public meetings open to the public at all times. You see in the definition of meeting that it could be a meeting if it's conducted electronically on the telephone, and that's when a lot of the board's questions come up with regard to open meetings. But the reason I'm talking about open meetings law is not for that reason. We could talk about that today. So we'll go on to the next slide. So this is just a notice requirement, and this is intended to make sure that the public can actually be in. It makes no difference, or it doesn't really serve the purpose of the open meetings law. If you say it's open to the public's not notified about when the meeting's happening or where it is. So next slide, please. So what does the open meetings law say about public participation? Nothing. It really doesn't. It really does. And it requires that meetings be open to the public, but it doesn't require a governmental body to allow members of the public to speak or to actively participate. And that not at all saying that public participation isn't required in certain circumstances or even appropriate or desirable under certain circumstances, because it certainly is. I mean, what's the point of having the public there if you aren't receiving public input? But I think it's important just to point out from a legal standpoint that there's no requirement except under certain circumstances to allow members of the public to speak or actively participate in meetings. And that's kind of what we're doing tonight in this work session, in this informal setting. So next slide, please. So public participation is required. I think it's important to say that you're elected to represent the public. So that's the public's primary means of participation in government, is electing its board of trustees. And I think you have to remember that, right? Because you were elected for a reason, and you're representing the people who elected you and making decisions and being held accountable through the election process. So then I think, the more practical time that it's required, public participation is required, is during public hearings. And these are the requirements under the statutes. It's a non-exclusive list, but these you'll recognize as being times that you're actually required to have a public hearing. And that means, giving the public really all that means in the legislative setting, when you're talking about adopting ordinances, is allowing the public an opportunity to speak on a particular matter that's being discussed by the board. So some of these, like PV applications, are quasi judicial, so there are greater requirements and responsibilities to the board to act like a judge, to not speak about the subject matter outside of the hearing setting, and things like that. And that's another training for a different day too. But in general, these are really the only times where you have to give the public an opportunity to speak. And I'm saying required because this is when you have to. It's not to say at all that you shouldn't give the members of the public an opportunity to speak in all of your meetings. So next slide. Okay, so this is what your current rules of procedures say. I saw that it was adopted by resolution 2007-10. And then that had been amended in 2018. They don't say specifically like the resolution, but that's why it says that's amended. Just so you know. But that's something we can discuss at another time. So the first looks like with presentations to the board when folks are invited. Is that when because there's that section 8 as well. Or is this tell me a little bit about,
I think that's when people ask to be on the agenda.
okay,
So they come up and do a presentation to the board. When the board invites somebody to come to a presentation, for example, we ask the library. People to come
Right.
and do a presentation.
okay, that makes sense.
And that's language that does need to be cleared up though, because I went through the same thing. Because I know that you do 3 minutes and I thought, well, this means when developers do.
Right, yeah, and I think that, I think that is an important clarification. So this is what the policy says, and then you have that other section 8. Where essentially you're allowing, in practice, you're allowing everyone to speak. After every single motion that gets a second, right? So, next slide, please. Yeah, so basically you're holding a public hearing on every single agenda item. And, you know, there are some municipalities that do that. And usually it's because they have a charter requirement that requires them to do that. But it's not that typical. And I wanted to I wanted to make sure this presentation wasn't too redundant and covered all the same things as Leslie's very thorough workbook. So I want to talk about the benefits of what the board does now versus the disadvantages. And I think there are some benefits, right? The members of the public have the opportunity to hear a summary of an item from staff. And they have the opportunity to hear the board discuss the details before they provide their input. And they have public comments. Public comments might be more pertinent and better informed because of that. You can think of other benefits of that process. I just want to make sure we're kind of covering all of them.
It's more town hall participation by people. I think people like that.
Right. Yeah, right.
You asking for input?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I participated in meetings from the public side for years. I actually don't. So I'm used to the other side of it. And the benefit to me is that as a function of government in general, this is the only opportunity that any of us have to actually participate. I mean, you can can't participate obviously in county or state affairs or like whatever national, you will march on a, you can do that, but you don't run into any of those people at the grocery store and get to have a conversation with them about what's been going on in town or ask questions, interface with the public. And I think that having that opportunity of truly engaging and knowing that you were heard is invaluable as a citizen. Just to know that your participation goes beyond just checking a box. So to me, it was very valuable to have this experience, and I'm surprised it doesn't happen.
And I just want to add, I came for 2 years to every meeting prior to becoming a trustee. I know I was a thorn at times, but I was able to bring up issues that the board wasn't aware of. Things that I noticed, and I think it made a big difference in a lot of the policy setting, to be quite honest. So I really pride the fact that we allow the public to come and bring in and comment on our motions. They have a lot of information to provide.
That we don't know. And there have been, Suzanne has, with our previous attorney, found little flaws in what was happening, and I think go back and be revised and may have saved us from implementing something that was unenforceable or done improperly. So there's value in reaching out to the crowd. Beyond that, I think that I know everybody thinks that it takes a long time for the public to have their piece. But that was the impetus for getting that software that makes transcripts, automatic transcripts, so I could actually measure how much time went into each part of the meeting. And on average, it's maybe like 20 minutes, 30 minutes at most for the public comment, and the rest of it's all us.
it's also very interesting.
We have tried from the.
Okay.
I wouldn't want the discussion to drift in the direction of, public participation versus not public participation. I think it could easily go that way. I think we have to always keep in mind that there are lots of other ways to do it. And that's what we need to do, is look at other ways to do it that don't make us vulnerable to gridlock, to the dysfunction that was there. That has to be kept in mind at all times. So I think there are many, many ways to do it. And we see, well, is most, I got the impression from the packet that we're sort of unusual. That most municipal governing bodies do gather information.
Right, yes, that's correct. Most municipalities do it in a different way, where they have a structure where folks can come in and they have a public comment section. And we'll get into that a little bit more, but it was very well spelled out in the workbook that I wasn't prepared. But that is the typical practice, to hold it at the beginning of the meeting to allow folks to come in and speak and on any agenda item or on just general matters affecting the town, and just not speaking on every single agenda item during that particular agenda item. Whenever there's a motion. So that is the typical practice. And I also don't want us to get into public participation versus no public participation, because that's really not what I'm advocating for at all. I think members of I hear the value in the statements that you've made about, feeling heard and having an opportunity. Municipal government, one of the best values of it is you're closest to the people. I mean, you don't get this level of participation anywhere else. And you learn things that you wouldn't otherwise know for the public. So I certainly don't want that value at all to be taken for granted. I know you don't.
So we have lots of options.
Yeah. And I'm going to give you some reasons that I hope will be compelling to maybe get some new ideas. And this is just going to be first blush look at some of these, different options. Can think about them.
Go back.
Oh, yes. Well, that's okay. So, yeah, perfect. So then we want to talk about, the disadvantages too. I mean, we know it's long meetings. That's really probably the primary reason that a lot of municipalities do it differently. I've heard you say often it's hard to make decisions after 9:30, and sometimes you don't get to everything. And in our last meeting, there was a very important issue that had to be discussed before adjourned, and that came going to 10. So, I certainly take the point that it's very important to have the public participation, but maybe there are some ways for time. So there is an opportunity, and I use the word attack, I couldn't think of anything better, but attack individual board member statements, staff presentation. If you have the public comments in a different setting, maybe you're not getting those kinds of comments that are just really nitpicking at something that you said, rather than the really overall general purpose of in the subject matter of what you're really discussing and deciding. It does encourage some back and forth dialogue and debate. Sometimes you guys have emotions that aren't really related to the ultimate matter at hand, right? But you still are allowing members of the public to speak on those. And sometimes they're housekeeping or ancillary. When you're moving to revise a resolution prior to adopting it, maybe that's important to have the public comments on. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's really the ultimate resolution or the ultimate motion to approve the resolution with that particular revision that needs to have the public comment on it. Isn't that an appropriate time to have that? And I know that that's kind of a generalized way of discussing it using that example. But does there need to be public comment on adoption or amendment of the agenda, things like that. So any other disadvantages?
Yeah, people can tend to throw off topic and start off on a tangent that has nothing to do with the agenda or whatever we're discussing now.
And that's part of our problem too. We should call the planning board whenever that happens. And assist with keeping control of it.
I think there's.
So that's, I just want to say that that's our fault. We're not. Practice.
There's a thing that happens to all of us in the board and also in the public is that we tend to be active. You know, and this kind of thing where every little thing that comes up gives an opportunity for reaction. Is that always well thought out? Is it something that's discerned? Is it something that someone's put time into? We were asked tonight to fill out stuff. Now we're thinking in advance about what we want to do, rather than just reacting to what we're hearing. And I think that's one of the disadvantages. Is it encourages that reaction.
Yeah, I totally agree there, Dave. I think that that's really the crux of. It becomes antagonism. It becomes antagonism. Yes. And I think that really, what the answer to that antagonism is on us not to respond. Right? And I make it a point. I mean, there's great people in here throwing insults at me, you know, and that's okay. You know, it's not, that comes with the territory, because I would much rather have people come here and say it to my face for the first time than say it to each other. You know, it's much better to have that kind of stuff happen in public to me, to have it said, and then I can go back to them, and I have, and in the interim begun to go back to some of the people and say, hey, you never told me about that before. We never even spoken or met. Can you tell me more about how you feel and why? And it creates community. It's an opportunity for communication. So it's on us not to react, but just to listen and know that they're being honest in some fashion.
So I think now might be a good time for an observation. I think you all agree on the level of participation that you want to get in a certain sense. You know, you all agree it's important. You all agree that the citizens bring value and should not be excluded of meetings, and that, you know, they're an integral part of the government. You agree that there are some disadvantages and there are some benefits to what you're doing now. So maybe the question really is there possibly a way that you can do it better? And if there is, can we still achieve those benefits while getting rid of some of those disadvantages? And I think let's move to the next slide. So we talked a little bit about this. This is the standard meeting format, and most cities and towns schedule a comment period at the beginning, allow the commenters to speak on agenda items and other matters of public concern. During a particular agenda item. There's a time limit like the one imposed already by this board, and typically municipalities won't allow time to be yielded or allotted to another speaker. The exception is that public hearing, and there is a reason why there's public hearings on certain items. The law requires public hearings on certain items that, you know, are grave policy concerns, or you know, adopting building codes, for example, was the one that just came up recently when the town adopted the 2018 code. So public has the opportunity to comment on certain things by law. So let's go to the next slide, please. So benefit of the standard meeting format, you know, we talked about these a lot. This is kind of just the reverse of what I said with the disadvantages of the town's current practice. but I think it's important to say, there is a lessened potential for personal tax and scrutiny of individual board and staff member statements. Maybe if you put things up front, you're lessening that back and forth dialogue. Or maybe you're having that still, but you're doing it at the beginning of the meeting during the public comment period. I mean, that's not as common to, actually respond in the meeting to citizen statements. But there are certain ways that you could try to control that kind of back and forth dialogue if you wanted to have it during a public meeting. And then, maybe lessen the public's ability to comment on things that aren't necessarily related to public business. And really returning the focus to the public business and the formation of public policy. So let's go to the next slide, Sam.
Sorry, before you get away from that, can you go back to it real quick? Sorry. Okay, so our intent here is to build trust, right? We're building trust. What I'm reading is a benefit of this being is lessen the potential for scrutiny of individual board and staff members. And I feel like that is exactly contrary to building trust. When you remove the opportunity, it destroys that trust. And I know that what's been doing it too, and the water outage has incidents that have eroded the trust of public and town government here. But those are just the ones that made the paper. There have been a lot. And I don't want to go through them. I don't think it's productive right now. But people understand that there have been some serious problems for a long time with how towns operated. And it has pervaded through different boards and mayors and staff, and it's still here, so by being more open with what we're doing and inviting people in to scrutinize our statements, I think builds trust rather than erodes it. Yeah, I think that's fair.
But I would disagree on one point, because most of those statements that come under scrutiny of individual statements are usually hypercritical, and a lot of them are false. And because then we as generally don't respond to those, then they stand out as statements that then sometimes get picked up in the media and held as true when they are not. And if the staff member or the board member responds to them, then it ends up as an argument, and it's a disputation in the board meeting, which isn't returning the focus to public business and the formation of good policy. So it doesn't build trust. It doesn't help the community move forward at all. All it does is build animosity. And so I don't think that is helping this board or this community move forward at all.
Well, and let me just clarify what the scrutiny, what I wanted to focus here on was scrutiny of individual statements, and don't mean trying to advise the board to try to lessen scrutiny of the board's decisions, or of even, the public has perfectly, public has the right to come in and make a public comment on even something they've observed the staff do. I mean, public has the right to do that at a public meeting. It's a matter of public concern. Certainly don't want to lessen the ability of the public to do that. I think it's more of a timing issue. And what I mean here really is a certain statement. If you have a motion on the table to do whatever it is, to approve a certain policy, right? A trustee makes a statement, and then it's getting time for the board's vote. Mayor opens up the public comment section, and a member of the public just picks out a particular statement of one or two folks on the trustees and starts taking issue with that when the decision, could turn out to be completely different, is that really productive in that instance to have that, even that individual statement attack? And maybe some of you feel that it is. And that is, we can disagree about that, but I think that was my point, just to say, yeah, it's really those individuals nitpicking. Yeah, the nitpicking, yeah.
But I also have to say, it is affecting the town's reputation and it's affected your ability to form a good team. The word is out there that the meetings are pretty intensive and that staff members get pursued.
And one of the things that this has done is I've seen it now for years. And basically the last 30 years is it's paralyzed the town from taking action. We can't get anything passed. It takes 6 months to get a resolution or an ordinance passed because of this. It paralyzes the process. And that's part of the reason why we never get anything done. We don't get the water system fixed because we're too busy nitpicking. And a lot of it is the board too, but it tends to be the public, and a lot of people speak because they want to hear themselves heard. And that's lovely, but it takes up a lot of public business time.
Maybe we can take it to a different level and think about how do we move forward to build the trust and allow the stay out of the debates about, this word is wrong or that word is wrong, or this is what hampers us. I really think there's ways where we can perhaps carve out parts. Because one of the things that bothers me is I like the idea of engaging individuals and talking it through and going back and forth. We don't have a form to do that even tonight. Maybe there's a way we can start looking at how can we have more in, like right now, when I walked in this room, I thought, hey, this is kind of a cool way. What if it's like a fishbowl, and then the public could sit around us, they could hear us a lot better, those kind of things. Even that might be a helpful thing. But the ability that you interact back and forth. And maybe that's one thing we can possibly get at.
And, Leslie came up with this idea of having this morning before the meeting, kind of like a public comment period, because people come up and they have simple questions. And if we don't answer those questions and they don't get answered, then they can't be the simple, yes, that goes there. Or, Leslie can look into that and she will get back or something like that.
It's the bump on the log. We have to be like a bump on the log listening to that and can't respond.
Right, and then the opposite of that is how long do we allow something to go on and back and forth without resolution that takes up the whole time and then nothing comes of it and then other people don't get to speak who want to speak. So we have to find some kind of process that will allow both pieces to happen and keep civility and, people happy and engaged.
So, we've talked about this in the past and other things have been tried. Dave, you and Jeff were working on the revisions. I'm not sure how much of that actually came through under the 9:30 thing. I think part of that, right? The hard cutoff at 9:30, wasn't that?
Yeah, that was part of it was that we had some kind of a more informal meeting in between or there. So that we could have that back and forth dialogue.
Yeah. We tried the comments at the beginning and what happened, I think, with that mostly was I don't remember how long it was like in 21, I think. But like it was, I gave a spiel and went through the thing, I gave a spiel and went through the thing. And you guys went and had a 10:30, and the same thing with the written questions, you hadn't written out for a while. Like, please submit all your questions in writing for him. And yeah, exactly. Basically, in attempting to actually have more coherent and less chaotic meetings, these measures weren't effective. So I think that I have an alternate suggestion that we become more orderly and start following our rules, that we have written down. And this is something I suggested in the past. I have some, I guess, materials or like, I got checklist schedule and survey format motion recorder that I've shared with Mary in the past, that I think could be helpful, and if we have time tonight, I'd like to show them with you guys. But I think that just what we need is strong leadership to say, okay, we are not going to react to these comments. If somebody's over time, stop. If somebody's off topic, a board member who's off topic, stop. You know, if somebody's already spoken several times on a matter and they want to speak again, I'm sorry, you've already spoken several times. We're trying to get through this. This is where we are. We need to get the next step, right? We ready for a vote? Yes. What's the vote? We took it. Fine. You know? But having a calm, measured pace to the meeting, I think would go a long way to quelling all that, all the delays and all back and forth, all the animosity it's because we tolerate it. It's because it's tolerated.
I just want to say one thing that I think you've all noticed our meetings have been so much better.
Yes, they have.
And I want to bring that to what the crux of the problem has been, and it was getting that information from our administrator. We were put in terrible situations by decisions she had made that we then had to be the fall guys, to be quite honest. And it got ugly with citizens. And that's not happening now, because what it boils down to is so important that our administrator be professional and have experience. So we have a lot of weight on our shoulders to hire the best administrator we can. But honestly, things are so much better. Thank you, Leslie and Mary. It's made a world of difference. So I think there's been much less excited citizens that are upset. That's not happening because we're not being put in the situations where people are very upset. So I think the way we're proceeding is good.
We as a board are not very efficient. Last year, we had over 60 meetings. That's twice normal, and less was done last year. Our most critical function is budget, and the finance officer was never given budget priorities by this board. And I think that part of the problem is that Resolution 2017-10-06 were implemented to make the board more efficient, didn't work. Right, we're not more efficient. So I think we need to can those and restructure how we do meetings, because the structure is the foundation for efficiency. And this standard meeting format, I like. On one extreme, you have Jim Wingfield, mayor of Hotchkiss, who allows no public input at all, except at public hearings, which is required by law. Even Tom Wills complained that reporters couldn't ask questions. That's an extreme. That won't function for us. But what we're doing now is we're allowing far too much public comment on minor issues. It just keeps dragging us off and making the meetings go on forever. We don't finish the meetings. We have a special meeting to finish the meeting, and it also drags on. The advantage of moving the public comment to the front and clustering it is going to make the meetings more efficient. People have a chance to comment on either an agenda item or just a regular item that's, something that's of their particular interest. It's not on the agenda, and they're not being denied access to the board. But then the board can do deliberations separately without being continuously interrupted and dragged off track. This is obviously a format that's been used in many municipalities and has been found functional. We have a format that's been found non-functional. Why don't we switch it?
Were you going to go into the other options?
Yeah.
I'll keep going. Yeah, I think I have, basically this is looking to sort of advocate for this what we've deemed here the standard meeting format. And I was trying to anticipate some of the things that might be close and try and convince the board that the standard meeting format might serve the purposes that provide the benefits that the board believes its current policy is achieving. And so let's go to the next slide. So, so can the board go standard without losing the benefits of its current structure? And we've talked about these benefits already. So what about these suggestions of using the standard structure, having the public meeting? One thing I noticed is that there's not a lot of information that's kind of provided in digestible bits yet. And how is the public to know what's going to be discussed until it's already discussed? And a lot of times what towns and cities will do is they'll have relatively detailed memoranda at the beginning of each packet item and agenda item. And it will explain the ins and outs of the board's decision essentially before the board begins deliberations. So one of the concerns is the public should have the opportunity to comment on really the details of what's being discussed. What if you provide that detail up front? Of course, it's not going to capture everything at all times, but it'll work itself out a little bit in practice because the board will say to staff that this memo should have included, whoever prepared it would be to the town administrator or to me, most likely. I would have liked to have seen this in the memorandum last time around. Can you please include it next time? There's templates that basically say, here's a summary of the issues. Here's the discussion. Here's what staff is looking for as far as a decision from the board or direction that can be provided to staff to make their decisions. What's the financial, the fiscal impact? How does this affect the overall budget and things like that? And I think if you included something like that, and then hear public input at the beginning of the at the meeting, that would help. Wouldn't that help inform the board's discussions and deliberations just as well as, and wouldn't the public have just as good of an opportunity to provide a comment on an item if they were already advised of the issues ahead of time?
I think that would work for the town trustees as well, because we get a bare outline and basically no information at all. So we have to ask questions and then we debate amongst ourselves. And if we have a summary, that eliminates a third of what we're doing with amongst the town council before we even get to public input. I think that's a very much more efficient way of handling this.
So that we would have to structure things differently, because when I get the agenda, it's only right before it's released. And there's all kinds of items on there that I don't even know anything about. So there is a process that you can require that, like when the district proposed their GoPro grant, that you require them to provide certain information. So we could talk about that, but I think that's a good idea, because that gives the public some background for this item to comment on. Right now, it's like, oh, there's this agenda item and you don't quite know what's going on there. Yeah.
Well, and one of the questions I have is how much staff time is this going to take?
Yeah, exactly.
It will take more staff time, but you have to look at the efficiencies in other areas. I have a question. I don't want to go down the wrong road, but this is something that bothered me about a previous meeting. We had some people get up and comment on the cell phone tower and say that this development an expansion had been proposed. We had two people get up, and I mean, and they were very upset about this expansion of the development that was going to go up. And I'm like, expansion, development. Why don't I know about this? Well, it was because they somehow had made a big leap from a lease renewal to some sort of new proposal. And that's where I would have felt better correcting them, because then the information that's on the video, people are like, cell phone tower expansion, oh my goodness. And I think, you know, talking about or agreeing on a policy to respond to just absolute. And then I've heard since then that there are all these rumors going around that there's this big expansion happening up at the cell phone. And trust me, we would know about that because there are more regulatory issues with expanding cell phone towers than just the town of Paonia.
Well, I don't know if it took, because I remember discussing that issue with the board, and they're asking for expanded leasing rights, but that doesn't mean it's going to be a big expanded building in the area. I mean, so maybe there's, you know, maybe there needs to be more plain terms used than explaining those things in a public setting. If, you know,
Right.
using the word expansion might have caused that to snowball.
And it's still out there, I think.
That's interesting.
Trying to tell you that there's rumor, it will expand and.
Basically, bigger than that.
Cell phone condo up there.
If I could get back to the meeting scenario, actually, you know, what I'm hearing is what we would have is we have public comment only at the beginning unless there was a public hearing later in the meeting. I think what Jeff and I proposed earlier was a hybrid of that, where we had, there was public input at the beginning, there was anything not on the agenda. Then there was, we're gonna go into whole business. Public, yeah, we have public comment on any of these items. Focused to the public, and then here's new business and public comment on a new business items. So they don't have to be all over the planet at the beginning and get the whole dang structure, because someone may want to come up and talk about one or two items on old business, one item on new business, one item that comes further on. And so that's what Jeff and I tried to come up with, some kind of a hybrid of that. It wasn't just focusing it right at the beginning, and no one says anything.
But we tried that day and it did not work. I remember mistakenly, we
It got
tried
shut down immediately by a trustee who said,
No.
I want to
It
hear.
was not, no, it was not shut down immediately. We ran it for a couple
First
of,
meeting we
and
tried.
no, it was not the first
Actually, it's
meeting
not.
we tried.
First meeting we tried it. Said, I want to hear from the public comments.
But it wasn't the first meeting we tried, because we did it. But it just didn't work.
A lot of the public comes to meetings and they want to comment. And they have to wait through 2.5 to 3 hours before they can comment on an issue. And a lot of people don't. They don't make it through and they don't come to comment because it's a work night. And I can't stay up until 9:30 and wait to speak for 3 minutes.
You know, that's where the trust comes in, because
Yeah.
then there's a feeling that the board is acting behind closed doors or doing things late when I can't be there.
Right. And that's a lot of it too.
For my part, I like the suggestion. I do think implementation is hashed out, like how much time is it actually going to take, because there's a lot to go on. But something that I noticed happened when we did do the comments up front is that as we progress to an agenda, the thoughts occur that weren't there when you started. So it's really impossible to say everything up front because you haven't done, and this approach really helps that. I also noticed that frequently I wouldn't say something in a meeting because a trustee had already mentioned it. It's happened a lot with Dave, actually, where I was going to say something, but they got to it first. So really, I'd be wasting my time if I got up there at the beginning and said blah, 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 and Dave was going to say it anyway, when it came time to vote. So in that sense, having upfront information and then also waiting until it's, I guess, closer to the vote or after things have been said can save everybody some time.
The other thing we did is, I remember there was one board meeting where we actually had an agenda item where we had The whole thing was laid out. It was very detailed. And then there were pros and cons, and then there was the staff recommendation.
I remember there was one.
I think you would just. Oh my God.
But your staff would then have to know what was gonna be on the agenda.
Exactly.
Falling apart. Yeah.
All the process. Yeah,
And perhaps we need to start the agenda on the Wednesday before.
exactly.
And it's due on Friday to the council as the agenda packet. But that may be the way to go. You know, the last minute addition of everything gets chaotic as well. You know, and that's the hard part about it. You
Well-
can't prepare. And being prepared prevents piss poor performance. That's where.
I've heard several claims that we tried this, and we tried that. And just coming from a background as a teacher in education, you don't try stuff for, 3 classes and say, well, that didn't work. Part of those experiments I didn't witness, a few that I did. I saw nothing else changed. And I think what we really need to do is genuinely change the deep structure of the meetings. Have a plan for how we want public input and do the whole deal. And then stick with it for a while and then have a rubric for evaluating whether it worked or not. What's that?
Well, Thomas had that being in the meeting for a while. How did we do?
Yeah, and we did.
Yeah, but that wasn't directed at a particular experiment.
No, it wasn't.
That wasn't a measure of your success on one particular thing that you do.
And a lot of times we vote outrun the time. You know, at the end, at 10 o'clock, we're ready to go home. I'm not willing to sit and correct a meeting. And that's
Right.
Well, that was what I was thinking during some of those statements. It's not going to work perfectly right away. It's going to take a long time for everyone to get used to it, to adjust whatever changes that you make in your meeting structure. And if you don't give that as long enough time for you actually to see the benefits of it, you won't ever change the structure. You'll always keep going back to what you've been doing. And whether or not, maybe it turns out that you commit to, let's say you commit to something for 6 months and it doesn't work. You go back to this, at least you gave it a shot, right? And you're trying to improve because, we've all discussed that this isn't, the most efficient meeting structure, right? But it does allow public participation. It is achieving some benefits. So why not try to give it a shot, a new meeting structure, and try and commit to that for a while. And of course, there's a new board, they can just scrap it, whatever. But it's commit to it at least among yourselves and see how it goes.
So we just want to make sure that as we're making changes, it sounds, and John kind of had a good point here. How many things do we want to change at once is the question, because really, if you're doing a scientific experiment, you should only change one thing. Whereas if you're trying to just be radical, you do everything all at once and hope when what sticks.
No, we're trying to make behavioral changes, trying to train a rat to get from here to there. You do small incremental changes and then you train the rat how to do it. If you want to do a scientific experiment, you set up your structure, you go with your structure, and then you evaluate your structure. You don't do incremental changes. You do it.
And I don't want to cut it off. But sometimes, particularly with institutions and bodies like this, the little changes, the single variable changes won't have any effect unless you change the structure of what's underlying it too. That makes the whole thing far more complicated, which is why social science is not really science, right?
realm of social finance here, it's trickier. I'm not sure how many slides are left. Let's see. See that, you know, maybe see the board's used to having discussion. Yeah. Well, that's it for meetings.
There's some ways that, there's a lot of different ways that you can approach this. And I'm just gonna say right off the bat, I'm not a big fan of the new business and the old business model. I like the action item model. But you can do, you know, you can have your business meeting set aside for the board. You can do a workshop ahead of time and go through the agenda items and have the discussion and all that stuff. And then when you get to the business part, you go just the board doing the business. There's all kinds of models that you can do that I think would be, because when I first got here, my gosh, these meetings are so chaotic and the staff is like, oh, they're so much better. So I was thinking, you know, the 3 minutes, which is standard thing. But when I watched meetings, it was obvious to me that there was that both sides felt like there was a benefit to the interaction. So how do you build that interaction in around agenda items without stymieing the board business? And I think that's the question. And it's not necessarily to take, like, I will have to say that I'm bothered by the board speaking and then taking comment. Because I think that sets up for the dialogue or the debate back and forth. But so the way that I've seen you do it is that you introduce the item, you all state your opinions, and then you take comment, but that invites the debate, which I don't know, to me, bothers me, because the board has distinct responsibility to carry out the business of the town. But you could do that in a workshop where you just went agenda by agenda item and say, you know, and have a dialogue with the group about the agenda item. And then when the workshop's over, then it's just board business. And I mean, there's a whole bunch of ways that you could accomplish that. What I think is both the public and the board desire to get that kind of in-depth input without hamstringing the moving forward of making decisions, which is my concern right now, watching the meetings.
So I've noticed that part of your, in your workbook. And thanks for explaining the debate, because I was like, that's what we're doing is debating the motion. But you mean debate between the public.
The public and the board, that's right.
Okay, so that again falls on us. That's the reactionary thing, because if there's no response from us, or at least no confrontational response, you know, then we just say, thank you for the initial information. Are we ready to vote? Right? We don't have to engage in a dialogue at all. And by the same token, we don't have to shut up the public giving their opinion, because we can tolerate it. We can rise above that reaction.
So, Thomas, the only thing I'll say, and I agree that a lot of this takes like some restraint in a way. And in your current structure, if you were to say, okay, well, I'm not going to engage and train yourselves that would be a lot better, right? But what happens with the new board? And what if it's an institution, right? So if we don't implement policies and procedures that are forward looking, it solves the issue temporarily, solve it forever, you know. So not the best.
And in truth, we have not been engaging. That has been happening for quite some time. It's where we have not been discussing things. The public gets up, they say what they want to say, and we don't discuss. So, you know, everything's well, you know, it's really beginning. The bottom line, we don't say anything when the public comes up to give their input after we have.
So why don't we rescind our current structure try this standard structure for a while. And if it seems to be working, put it into a resolution.
Well, we can't make a decision tonight.
No, I'm not saying that, I'm just suggesting
Yeah.
as a solution to it.
Well, I think if there's a way that we can move the decision on the agendas back so that the town administrator and the staff have the time to be able to prepare the meaty stuff that could get put into the packets, that would help the whole situation a whole lot and move things along much more quickly. But that means that we would have to have our agenda meeting, and probably for next week, we would have to have it tomorrow.
You would probably have to have it a couple of weeks ahead of time, particularly when you have agenda items from the non. It's easy to deal with agenda items from the staff, but when you've got all these other outside entities placing agenda items on, we have to go back to them and say, you need to provide this, this, and this, and you need to put it in a memo or whatever. And we've got to develop standards for written material. I mean, I tried to do that with the tree board and I didn't get very far. But if we had, you know, if for instance, if we had from the tree board, here's our goals that we're going to work on, blah, blah, blah. And I actually described all this in detail. Here's what we'd like to ask the board to have the staff do, blah, blah, blah. That's clear. It's down in writing. People can comment on it. They can come in and say, well, I disagree with goal number 3 on the tree board. You know what I mean? There's something to comment on. But if we don't have, if that's only always a verbal presentation,
Right,
then people are reacting on the fly to what they're hearing.
right. And you can't do that in 5 minutes in front of
Yeah,
the board.
yeah.
So that would mean for the next board meeting, we would have to have the agenda done tomorrow. And that would give 2 weeks before the board meeting. But that means we have to train everybody out there who wants to put something on the agenda.
We're gonna have to develop policies. We're not, what I'm trying to get you to do, Mary, is not put this on the next board meeting. Vacation time.
Train the public. No, we're not.
Same trying to get our attention.
I had a couple of things to say. So one, I'd like to defer to you guys what my trainer taught me at one of her lessons. She's been, or one of our meetings, she's been a clerk for what, 30 years, something like that. She has worked at big places, small places, and pretty much any place in between. And she really suggested that you guys begin utilizing work sessions more. That doesn't mean have one every week or anything like that. But when you know something big is coming up, you want an ordinance change, you want a policy change, or you got to do a personnel manual. It's a good time for you to interact with the public. It's more of an informal setting. And I've noticed you guys do a lot better with each other in an informal setting. You guys have great discussions. And so that's something just to toss out there too, as you guys are looking at some of these bigger things. We're pretty good gauges of what's going to be contentious, you know, and it's a good opportunity for you to even have that question and answer session with people. My second one was I was going to agree with Leslie about having public comment before board discussion. I have the kind of unique experience of being the one person who's required to zip my mouth and just watch everything. And you guys listen really well to the public, and it makes you guys rethink things all the time. I'm betting that, I mean, I'm not willing to put money on it, but I'm pretty close that if Thomas was to go back and look at that program he was talking about, which I've seen, it's very cool, that you'll find you have way longer discussions with each other after public comment than you do before, because they make you think of different things. It might be more efficient that way. And I can't even remember what the third one was now, so don't worry. What I was gonna say, you don't have to train everybody else. Train your clerk what format you want to use. And then when people are coming in and bringing stuff in, if I've got something that I can show the staff or my deputy or me if I'm available, and it's even a bulletin, okay, you need to have this information is required to be in and as much detail as possible to the packet, then you guys aren't having to worry about how you're supposed to teach everybody. Let the staff do it. We're the ones that they bring their things to, and especially me. I'm the one who's getting emailed all of their packet submissions. So I can help with that, and it'll make it easier on me because Fridays is hard, y'all.
That every municipality with the clerk sets hard deadlines in the packet, and they're usually Wednesday by the end of the day or Thursday by noon. And it's just to, you know, the clerk can be like, you didn't get that in on time, so it's not going in there. And it works well, it does. And it is responsibility of the clerk to say, this is the format that your packet map needs to be in. And this isn't ready for to make a decision, so.
One of the suggestions we're hearing is we hear suggestions or we got, oh, we hadn't thought of that from, get that a lot. And that's the thing that's nice about a work session. What questions do we need to answer pages or what questions do we need to answer? What more information do we need on form decision on this? And if the work session provides a forum on that, then 2 weeks later, that information is provided, we're not going to choose it.
Okay. Well, I'd like to share the documents tools that I built with you guys, if that's good. Can I share my screen on Zoom? I'm still in there. See if I can.
Well, what I'm hearing is we're gonna go to 4 meetings a month right now. And I have no problem with that if it makes all the meetings shorter.
You can do the workshop before the meeting on the same time.
If that's, I think that doesn't, yeah. I don't think that should work.
So, first thing that I put up, I mean, was a, just it's the agenda essentially, with a couple of additional items, and it's just a checklist format. And this is in preparation for my mayor pro tem duties, if I ever had to pull up a meeting, or ever had to chair a meeting. So I will say again, I would like to chair a meeting someday. If you guys would like to see me try to implement this in real life and step all over my own feet, I'd be happy to try it. Anyway, so as my intent is that as we proceed through the meeting, each item is checked off as we finish it, right? So that we know exactly where we are and that everybody knows what topic we're discussing. We don't have to, this is from our previous meeting on the 10th. We don't have to remind everybody of what we're on. This would be something that's either projected or on the screens or something visible to the public so that we can know that we're on track. And we also have other people with eyes on it so that people also know when we're off track. Aside from that, I also made this, it's just this survey form. So I have my microphone running right now, and my intent was to go like, okay, somebody, what's the motion? Okay. Oh yeah, can you say your motion loudly and clearly?
I move that we, I make a motion that we leave this room by 10 o'clock p.m.
Okay. All right, we'll see if that works. Even if it doesn't, no, it's not gonna work. Anyway, so leave by 10, sorry. Leave by 10, right? Made by Knudsen. Anybody second that?
I'll second that.
Okay, and that was Stelter. Now we can discuss it. Round one of discussion. Who wants to talk about leaving by 10? Anybody? Nobody? No discussion. Okay, public?
Discuss with my feet.
Okay, nothing. All right, we're ready to vote. Everybody in favor of leaving at 10? Ayes. Any nays? Maybe you count this. Okay, so then we submit. Now it's done, right? And each motion gets recorded. Each meeting, what we have is an Excel spreadsheet that lists all of the motions. I'm stamped, who voted, when, and what they said. And I think this is invaluable for saving Sim a lot of time. And if you want to use it, you're happy to, you're welcome. It is. All the documents I use for town are shared on my Google Drive, and they're all public unless they're specifically confidential. So if anybody wants to
to find this, I'll help you find it.
Something like this is great because one of the very failings we've had for years in the minutes is there's no recording of who voted for what unless it's unanimous. And that is a problem. This is a public record and it should be a public record forever. And we should have that. So
Anyway, these are, I think could be helpful tools. And if anybody has any suggestions, happy.
Sam, you already have a procedure for recording who voted and what, that you've been using over there. Would this make your job easier or is it irrelevant? What's your view?
It depends. I mean, sometimes you guys are really chaotic up there where it's hard to tell who has voted for what. I think my favorite are probably the polls just because there's no doubt in my mind. Seconds especially get hard. However, our meeting codes that we have that we use for minutes and for making the agenda and all of that actually has capabilities. It would require all of you to be on something, but you could actually input your own vote on the meeting codes itself. And it automatically records them. I'm learning to use that one right now. It just takes some practice because I have to remember to save after every item or I lose it all. But that's one of the reasons that I liked Thomas's other WordCat program too, is because when that transcription comes out, if I got a question, it's timestamped where that part of the discussion is. And it's, if the transcription's not clear, which usually it is, I can go right back to that spot on the video very quickly.
Yeah, my thinking was that this would have to be a tool for the chair because you have to slow the process that will be and how the interactions happen.
See, motions are, I move, that's why, see, it's I move well, X, but Y, and this is.
So having it written down would be helpful for that to say and some of the but saying that and make a transcription, I think would be helpful to say, okay, this is your motion, really? And then you say, well, let's revise that to.
And I try to write it down and repeat.
I know, yeah, and you must have really.
And then I can write.
That's why the microphone, if you guys.
To do that, that's what your clerk does. They write down the motion and you can say, can you repeat it back to us?
And then I'm more intent to do this.
You can.
No, first meetings I did, I had all the motions written down and I would tear them up.
It's
Is that- In other words, they can't hear the meeting, but the motion's already written. Sometimes I had to edit them because things change, but at least it was a seed to start the motion process. And it was it was better thought out than if I just did it ad hoc.
Well, and remember, we had a sheet that you had to write your motion down.
Yeah, that was,
At one point, and then submit it.
that was terrible.
And the reason I say that,
And not because, I have a hard time doing succinct motions, is that while I'm trying to remember what I've said, there's discussion going on and I can't do both. I did not like that. But if we could have a dictation thing.
Yeah.
Makes it.
That was.
It's not very reliable.
It's not very
My experience.
That's if everybody speaks clearly and one at a time, they can do a pretty good job.
How about Mr. Martin and Mr. Valentine get our new sound system
Yeah, we're gonna.
and then they. get that.
Yeah.
Maybe we can plug the system into that.
individual microphones would help a lot.
Exactly. Mr. Valentine and Mr. Martin.
Yeah. Just one plugins that at all.
Yeah.
So it's basically a tool that feeds a really complex process audio to Zoom. So I don't know, for this particular problem, I'm not
Okay.
sure how we would do this.
Well, we can still speak one at a time and clearly. I think that would hurt.
And would help the audience too, wouldn't it?
It would definitely, yeah, because we need the audio in this place to the audio. Really,
How many times have we heard from the public, I can't hear you.
right,
I'm
exactly.
guilty of that. You know, sitting in a better arrangement. Or in proximity, instead of halfway away. It just feels so integrated to me. But like, he's sitting at this days up front. And then everyone's sitting way back there like I'm up here. I just don't like it.
Well, we can't have people sitting behind us and not see our faces either, so.
They see our faces from sitting around us.
Except when you're sitting behind us.
Baseball is exactly what it is. Actually, that brings up a good point. I think that's probably the source of some of the difficulties is theater. Because it does take over, you know,
It's
the
what?
theater. The theater of present, like of being in public and having, you know, public speaking and the debate nature, you know, it becomes almost like a debate club sometimes. And I think if we can make sure to stay away from that, it will help us stay focused on doing government work. Because it's I don't think you can really intertwine it, you know, because it's public speaking and it's gonna be dramatic and there'll be emotions and presentation and, you know, all that. So you can't get there, but to try and keep in mind and minimize it, you know, I don't know if there's a procedure or process that you do. But really.
Well. I guess we could put this on the next agenda. See if we want to have a motion to at least propose a different format.
I think it would be better that we do a work session on it. Hammer out the details before we bring us.
Okay,
Isn't this a work session? What we did.
It is, but I haven't hammered anything out at all.
But we need to have some of those communication pieces in place before we do something that looks like certain.
okay. Maybe have a work session prior to the next meeting on this.
We're not going to decide or make no decisions, but.
Well, we're not gonna make
What's-
a
Yeah,
decision.
what determination would be done? You can do scheduling, that's not a decision.
Yeah, so we can schedule like a half hour
Yeah, to
work
do.
session prior to the meeting. That's-
So what would be the
15 weeks.
content of it that would be in addition to what we've done here now?
It would just open it up to the public and have, you know, public input on,
But
proposed schedules.
typically, we don't allow public comment on.
Right.
Yeah, no, it's been
No.
tradition to keep the public out of work sessions, otherwise historically, we never got anything done
So then
because it's dragged.
there would be a public comment period.
You can do it, it just say what was officially called a work session had certain parameters.
Okay, so we could call it a public comment period on.
But should the public, do we need public input on how we structure our meetings?
I think if we want public buy-in on it, yes, absolutely, yes, but
I think you need to have options for the public to comment on. So I don't know if this will work. If you, it's, you know, sort of a constellation is forming in your mind and how meeting structure would work better. You want to send it to me and I can compile a memo that here's the different options. And then we can put that out to the public and then they can come back and say, well, I like this. Or not. I mean, we can incorporate some of these,
I think these slides are.
the things that came out of the workshop. But I think if you just go free form in and say, what do you want? You're gonna get a whole discussion about public comment versus no public comment,
okay,
which is not what we're doing.
no,
We have had some great ideas tonight. We don't have a plan.
yeah, we don't.
Well, we have options. Let's just start campus. We have the, I like the summary, the agenda summaries is pretty big. We have early comments. We have dispersed comments. That is with each.
Yeah.
You know, new business, old business. We have comments before trustees.
Yeah.
And
Before discussion.
what else?
Well, work session, more interactive kind of sessions that we have, but also we're not doing old new business action items. Is a really good suggestion. Focuses us on what do we need to make a decision about that.
Some categories from us.
Yeah. Hey, if we're taking action on this, I better show up.
Right. Interspersed sessions, alternate.
Yeah.
Like meeting between meetings.
Yeah.
More meetings.
No, for instance, like meet once a week. And we have the other one is more of that dialogue. I'll throw these out.
Or maybe, yeah, action items once a month and discussion items once a month instead, if, if depending on priority stuff, do we have stuff that comes up with the absolute.
Or some things that we have to act on liquor license or something like that. And
With the agenda, we have an administrator and a clerk that have to do this. I say let them set the date deadlines for it and set the parameters. I mean, we don't have to debate this in public.
But what we need from you is the direction. Do you want to, so let's use the district as an example. They wanted you to, support this grant application that was going to affect the town of Paonia financially and the staff and everything else. So now we're going to be telling them, would probably a form to be on the agenda. In order to be on the agenda, you must provide this by this date. A detailed description of what you want to do, a detailed description of what the town of the impact on the town of Paonia, and financial impact, staff. I mean, I think that people should be providing you all this information. And what, action you want taken, and maybe you even say on there, what are the pros and cons? Let them analyze that. That goes to the staff. So then I would review that with the affected department heads. And in the case of a skate park, I would include the police department because I know about skate parks and it's going to be increased policing, the public works department, and we would put together a recommendation based on the information they gave us. That's the kind of in-depth stuff that you need to do in order for the public to be actually commenting on stuff.
Right, yes.
Otherwise, it's like, do you want a skateboard or skate park or not? I want a skate park. I mean, it was the Glenwood Springs miracle when we put in, and I think I've told you some of that story. It was the most incredible project I think Glenwood ever approved. But it costs money and it requires more police cars over there. That doesn't mean it's not a bad idea. It means it needs to be analyzed before you start.
no, what you're getting.
You have it down, you know exactly what you want,
Yeah,
implement it.
right.
There it is.
You mean the form?
Well, she knows exactly what we
Yeah.
want, or what she wants, and that works for us too. We can make much better decisions if we're informed.
So what I would do though, so in this new chain of command. Because I would sit down with the staff and we're in the department heads and we're gonna come up with these criteria that you have to submit.
Right.
And then I'm gonna bring them to you to approve, because if we do it, all the people that are coming are gonna say, what do you mean I have to provide all this information before it just got on the agenda?
Right.
So it's this interaction.
And you are, as board members, know what information you need in order to.
Right. So it has to be a process to arrange this that we're all involved in, is my point.
Best practices for us and the public, see that analysis. Ever gotten that in my 4 years of work, we had one memo that was like that.
Right.
Supposedly it came from the administrator, it was not, it was from Bolton Arnold. And he wrote it up and it was that warehouse. That was it. They wrote it down. For sure, and so if we have that for agenda, someone on the public that comes in, reads the pros and cons, now they're only, right, we get more ready.
And I thought there's a lot of small towns that some reason don't do staff reports. But most of the places where I've been an employee, we did them, or I instituted it. It's an important, I think Nick brings up a very big thing.
Biggest thing is about the day-to-day running of the town. You guys are right up in front of it. We're on the outside edge, and I can't make decisions if I don't have good. I don't make good decisions.
Oh,
I
I
make
agree.
decisions all the time.
Right, wrong, or indifferent.
But you know, just being the interim, you don't want to come in and rock all the boats in the harbor.
Instead of reading this one, I'm sure.
Water sewer moratorium.
You're really.
Okay. So the weeds are.
I think we have.
Right, and so moving forward, then
Yep.
she's gonna get a file of, that would be something we consider.
Yeah, and I'm not gonna put anybody's name in, I'm just gonna say, here are options.
Yeah.
I'd rather have names so we can blame people.
Meeting about that.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
To comment.
Excellent.
Yes.
Yes.